powerful king of the 80,000 monkeys living near the Ganges. Overhanging the river there was a great mango tree with huge and delicious fruits. When ripe, some fell on the ground and some fell into the river. Eating these mangoes with his monkeys, the great being foresaw that those that fell into the water would some day bring danger to the herd. He ordered that all the mangoes growing on branches over the river should be plucked when very small and discarded. However, one fruit was hidden by an ant's nest. When it was ripe, it fell into the nets which the king's fishermen had placed into the river. When they pulled out the ambrosial fruit, they took it to the king in Benares. When he tasted it, he developed a great craving for more and insisted on being taken to the tree from which it came. A flotilla of boats brought the king to the great mango tree. Camping beneath it, he ate mangoes to his heart's delight. At midnight, the great being and his monkeys came and leapt from branch to branch above, eating the mangoes. The king woke up and saw them. He ordered his men to surround the tree and prepare to shoot arrows at the monkeys so that they could feast on mangoes and monkey flesh the following day. Terrified, the monkeys appealed to the great being for help. He told them not to be afraid, for he would save their lives. So saying, he at once climbed to one of the branches over the river and then made a tremendous leap across the wide river to the opposite bank. There he cut a long bamboo shoot which he calculated would be long enough to reach across the river. Lashing it to a bush on the farther shore, he lashed the opposite end of the bamboo to his waist and then made a terrific leap back toward the mango tree, where the monkeys were cowering in fear for their lives. The shoot being slightly short, he grabbed an overhanging branch so that his own body's length filled the remaining distance. He signaled to the monkeys that they were to run across his body and then the bamboo shoot in order to escape to the other shore. Paying their obeisances to the great being and asking his forgiveness, the 80,000 monkeys ran across him to safety. In the process, one of the monkeys, later reborn as Devadatta, a cousin of the Buddha who repeatedly tried to undermine him, took the opportunity to leap from an upper branch onto the great ape's back, breaking his heart. After all the monkeys had crossed to safety, the wounded great being was left alone, hanging from the tree. The king, who had watched the whole thing, was struck by the greatness of his self-sacrifice for the sake of his monkeys. At daybreak, he ordered his people to gently bring the great ape down from the tree, bathe him, rub his body with fine oil, dress him in yellow, and lay him to rest. Sitting beside the great ape, the king questioned him about his action. The great being explained to him that no worry or death could trouble him, and that he had acted for the welfare of all those whom he governed, as an example for the king to emulate. After thus advising the king, the great being died. King Brahmadatta ordered funeral ceremonies due to a king for him, and then had a shrine built at the place of his cremation and had his skull inlaid with gold, which he then enshrined at Benares. According to the instructions of the great being, Brahmadatta then became a very righteous ruler and a traveler to the bright world. When the Buddha told this Jataka tale, he revealed that the human king was Ananda and that the ape king was himself. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD146 the 20th of November 2015 1336. Buddhism 147. In the long course of samsara, cycle of death and rebirth, there is not one among living beings with form who has not been mother, father, brother, sister, son, or daughter, or some other relative, being connected with the process of taking birth. One is kin to all wild and domestic animals, birds, and beings born from the womb. 17. It is said that the Buddha remembered all his past lives and told stories about them to illustrate moral lessons. Hundreds of these stories have been collected as the Jataka tales, or birth stories of the Buddha's past lives as a bodhisattva. 1. Dedicated to liberating others from suffering. The one recounted here, the Great Ape Jataka tale, see box, facing page, illustrates not only the Buddhist path as a way of personal development but also its importance in establishing moral guidelines for monastics, laity, and rulers alike. In Buddhist cosmology, there are multiple possible states of existence, include in hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, and gods. Whether interpreted as psychological metaphors or metaphysical realities, all these states of rebirth are imperfect and impermanent. Sentient beings take birth again and again, caught up in this cycle of samsara, repeatedly experiencing birth, aging, suffering, and death as a result of their actions and mental defilements. Finally, by purifying their minds of greed, hatred, ignorance, and other delusions, they are able to achieve nirvana, or liberation from cyclic existence and suffering. Nirvana. The goal of Buddhist practice is nirvana, which literally means extinguishing, often explained as the extinguishing of the fires of the three root afflictions of attachment, aversion, and delusion, which brings about the end of dukkha and the cycle of rebirth. To end the cycle of dukkha, one must end all craving and lead a life free of attachment that has no karmic consequences. One enters a state that the Buddha called quietude of heart. 18. A state beyond grasping, beyond aging and dying. 19. The unborn, undying, unsorrowing, stainless, the uttermost security from bonds. 20. For the Arhat, Pali, Arhat, Arahat, a worthy one, who has found nirvana in this life. No suffering for him. Who is free from sorrow, free from the fetters of life, free in everything he does. He has reached the end of his road. Like a bird invisibly flying in the sky, he lives without possessions. Knowledge his food, freedom his world. While others wander, he has found freedom. Peaceful his thinking, peaceful his speech, peaceful his deed, tranquil his mind. 21. When an Arhat dies, individuality disappears and the being enters the ultimate state of nirvana. given that the Buddha taught there is no eternal soul to escape the cycle of death and rebirth, it is hard to conceptualize this ultimate state of nirvana. The Buddha explained that rather than trying to speculate about the exact nature of nirvana, one should focus on doing those things that lead to it. His teaching emphasized following the path to nirvana and not being sidetracked by questions that do not help one to progress. To illustrate this point, a Buddhist monk practices meditation to calm and purify his mind. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD147, the 20th of November, 2015, 1336. 148 Buddhism. Remained silent when he was asked what happens to an arhat after death. Instead, he picked up a handful of leaves from the forest floor and asked his disciples which were more numerous, the leaves in his hand or those in the forest. When they replied, "Very few in your hand, Lord, many more in the grove," he said, "Exactly. So you see, friends, the things that I know and have not revealed are more than the truths I know and have revealed. And why have I not revealed them? Because, friends, there is no profit in them, because they are not helpful to holiness, because they do not lead from disgust to cessation and peace, because they do not lead from knowledge to wisdom and nirvana." 22. The spread of Buddhism. What are the key similarities and differences between Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism? After the Buddha attracted a group of disciples, he began to send them out in all directions to help teach the Dharma. 200 years after the Buddha died, a powerful Indian king named Ashoka led a huge military campaign to extend his empire. After he saw the tremendous loss of life on both sides, he reportedly felt great remorse, became a practicing Buddhist, and began to espouse non-violence. He had inscriptions written on rocks and pillars throughout his empire, teaching the Dharma with an emphasis on developing an attitude of social responsibility. Under King Ashoka's leadership, Buddhism was disseminated throughout the kingdom and outward to other countries, beginning its development as a global religion. As the Buddha's teachings expanded and adapted to local cultures, various schools developed, sometimes because of different interpretations of the monastic code, and sometimes because of differences of opinion regarding practice or how to interpret the Buddha's teaching. There are narratives that describe the spread of Buddhism from northern Indian schools of Buddhism, as well as from the schools that were established in southern India. There are also first-person accounts of Chinese monks who traveled through Buddhist lands in the first millennium CE. All these narratives depict a rich diversity of Buddhist practices and teachings. Nonetheless, though monks of various schools had different ways of expressing the Buddha's teachings, they still shared a common set of religious practices, rituals, and rules that defined monastic life for monks and nuns. These different expressions of the Buddha's teachings have become known as the branches of Theravada, initially, one school from a branch of Buddhism that Mahayana Buddhists derogatorily called Hinayana, or the lesser vehicle, but now generally understood as a branch in its own right, Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, but the similarities in practices were, and remain, far greater than the differences in the beliefs between the different branches. After Ashoka's death, advanced study and dissemination of Buddhist philosophy and culture were highly developed in great Buddhist universities, such as Nalanda in northeastern India, which was founded in the 2nd century CE. Other universities were founded in this same region in the 8th century, and were largely devoted to the study of Tibetan Buddhism, but still attracted scholars from different schools of Buddhism as well as from China and other countries. All of these universities had royal patrons and consisted of huge complexes with libraries and lecture halls and curricula that covered everything from linguistics to music, architecture, and science. Monks from different schools lived together at these universities, copying texts, studying for advanced degrees, and composing commentaries and treatises. However, eventually Brahmins reasserted their political influence and Buddhists were persecuted in some parts of India. With the growing popularity of devotional movements within Hinduism, Buddhism was already in decline by the time of the 12th century Muslim incursions. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD148 the 20th of November 2015 1336. Buddhism 149 into India and never became the dominant religion in the Buddha's homeland, although some monasteries remained active until the 16th century. Of the earliest Buddhist schools, only the one today known as Theravada Way of the Elders survives. The Theravada branch is prevalent in Southeast Asian countries such as Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. The schools that developed somewhat later are collectively known as Mahayana, Great Vehicle. Mahayana schools gradually became dominant in Nepal, Tibet, China, Korea, Mongolia, Vietnam, and Japan. The Vajrayana branch became dominant in Tibet. Followers of all these forms of Buddhism share many ideas and practices in common and are in general agreement about the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the teachings about karma, samsara, and nirvana. Theravada, mindfulness. Theravada Buddhists study the early scriptures in Pali, honor the life of renunciation, and follow mindfulness and insight meditation teachings. The characteristics are more obvious among intellectuals and monastics. Ordinary laypeople tend to be devotional in their practices, although in recent times there have also been efforts to promote meditation among Theravada laypeople. Tashkent, Samarkand, Kapilavastu, Silk Route, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, India, Tibet, China. Pali Canon Buddhists who follow the Theravada tradition study a large collection of ancient scriptures preserved in the Pali language of ancient India. This ancient canon, or authoritative collection of writings, is called the Pali Canon. This collection is also referred to as the Tipitaka, Sanskrit, Tripitaka. 3 baskets, because of the old practice of storing palm leaf manuscripts in wicker baskets. The 3 baskets are 3 collections of sacred writings, rules of monastic discipline, Dharma teachings, and scholastic treatises. After the Buddha's death, leading members of the community of monks started compiling an authoritative canon of teachings and monastic discipline. According to Buddhist law, this was done by a council of 500 elders who had studied directly with the Buddha. Venerable Ananda reportedly recited the Buddha's discourses from memory, and another close disciple rehearsed the discipline of the monastic order. Then the elders agreed on a definitive body of the Buddha's teachings, which were recited orally until the 1st century BCE, when the suttas, Sanskrit sutras, were written down. In addition to the Tipitaka, Theravadins accept Sir Thai non-canonical Pali works, such as later commentaries. The triple gem-like Buddhists of all schools, those who follow the Theravada, go for refuge in the triple gem, the Buddha, the Enlightened One, the Dharma, the teachings he gave, and the Sangha, community. To become a Buddhist, a person goes for refuge in these 3 jewels by reciting the Pali formula. Buddham Saranam Gacchami, I go to the Buddha for refuge, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, I go to the Dharma for refuge, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, I go to the Sangha for refuge. One takes refuge in the Buddha not by praying to him for help, but by honoring him as a supreme teacher and inspiring model. In a sense, taking refuge in the Buddha is honoring the Buddha wisdom within each of us. The Dharma is like a medicine that can cure our suffering, but it will not work unless we take it. In the Pali Canon, it is described as immediate, timeless, lead into calmness, and known only through direct experience and personal effort. The Sangha is ultimately the community of realized beings on the conventional level. The Sangha is the order of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who have renounced worldly life in order to follow, preserve, and share the Dharma. The Buddha established one of the world's first monastic orders, and the Sangha remains very strong in Theravada countries. To simplify their worldly lives and devote themselves to studying and teaching the Dharma, monks and nuns shave their heads, dress in simple robes, own only a few basic material items, eat no solid foods after noon, practice celibacy, and depend on the laity for their food, clothing, and medical supplies. Early every morning the monks set forth with an alms bowl, and lay people regard it as a merit-making opportunity to offer food to them. The monks reciprocate by offering spiritual guidance, chanting blessings, and performing iou social services, including offering advice and education. Buddhist monasteries are at the center of village life, not isolated, as one might imagine. The monasteries are left open and people come and go throughout the day. The monks hold a revered social position as models of self-control, kindness, and intelligence. In Thailand, it is common for young men to take temporary vows as monks, often for the duration of the rainy season when little farm work can be done. They wear saffron robes, set forth with shaven heads and arms, bowls, and receive religious instruction, while practicing a life of simplicity. Buddhist monks make daily rounds with their begging bowls, seeking food from lay people who serve them with reverence, as in this scene in Laos. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD150 the 20th of November 2015 1336. Buddhism 151. In contrast to the monks, there has traditionally been little social support for Buddhist nuns in Southeast Asia. Provisions were made during the time of the Buddha for women monastics to live in their own monasteries, practicing the same lifestyle as monks, but the order of fully ordained nuns, bhikkhunis, disappeared completely in Theravadin countries about 1,000 years ago. Many of the early Buddhist scriptures take an egalitarian position toward one's capacity for wisdom and attainment of nirvana, but spiritual power has remained in the hands of monks, and there has been little opportunity for nuns to take positions of teaching and leadership. Over time, some of the monks and the texts they edited became somewhat sexist. Because Buddhist monks are celibate, they are not allowed to come into direct contact with women, and many believe that women are hindrances to monks' spiritual development. Feminist scholars object to this interpretation. Thai Buddhist Venerable Dhammananda, for instance, asserts newly ordained monks who have not had much experience with practice and are very weak in their mental resolve may be easily swayed by sensual impulses, of which women are the major attraction. Even if no women are present, some monks still create problems for themselves by images of women they have in their minds. Women are not responsible for the sexual behavior or imaginings of men. The monks themselves must cope with their own sensual desires. Enlightened ones are well fortified against such mental states and are able to transcend gender differences. The Buddha himself found no need to avoid women because women no longer appeared to him as sexual objects. He was well balanced and in control of his mental processes. 23. There are now attempts to revive full ordination for nuns in Theravadin countries. A landmark event occurred in 1998 when 135 nuns from many countries received full ordination in Bodh Gaya. According to the Code of Trippy Plane9, ordination of nuns is possible only if a quorum of both ordained monks and nuns is present. In China, Taiwan, Japan, and Korea, orders of fully ordained nuns have continued, and therefore it was possible to assemble the requisite number of 10 bhikkhus and 10 bhikkhunis in Bodh Gaya. However, not all Theravadin monks accept the nuns' ordination as legitimate. Meditation. The Theravada tradition preserves a wide variety of meditation techniques for cultivating the mind, derived from the early Buddhist teachings. The two major forms of meditation practice are samatha, calm abiding, and vipassana, insight. The practice begins with increasing one's attentiveness to some 135 women from 23 countries received full Ordination as Buddhist nuns at Bodh Gaya in 1998, helping to revive orders of bhikkhunis. M0536186-186_CH05.INDD151 the 20th of November 2015 1336. 152 Buddhism. Specific object to focus the mind and achieve calm abiding. One then proceeds to the practice of vipassana to develop insight into dukkha, anicca, and anatta, the three marks of existence. As taught by the famous Burmese meditation master Mahasi Sayadaw. 1904 to 1982, vipassana practice begins by simply watching one's breath as it flows in and out, focusing attention on the rise and fall of the abdomen. 2. Keep the mind concentrated on the present movement rather than being tracked by uncontrolled, conditioned responses. One continually makes concise mental notes of what is happening, risings and falling. Other vipassana mars suggest observing a point on the upper lip as the breath goes in and out of the nostrils, posting one's attention like a gatekeeper at that point. Despite the attempt to hold the restless mind to one point, inevitably other thoughts and feelings arise in the restless mind. As they arise, one simply notes these thoughts and feelings, imagining, wandering, remembering, and returns one's attention to the rising and falling of the breath. Bodily sensations are handled in the same way, noting itching, tight, tired, and so on, as they arise, but maintaining an observer's attitude rather than letting one's mental equanimity be disturbed by reacting to the sensations. Periods of sitting meditation are alternate with periods of walking meditation, during which one notes the movements of the body in great detail, lifting, moving, and placing. If ecstatic states or visions arise in the process of meditation, one simply notes them and lets them pass away without attachment. In the same way, emotions that arise are simply observed, accepted, and allowed to pass away without evaluating them as good or bad. As Buddhist teacher Joko Beck mentions, ordinarily it is very easy to get caught up and stuck in our emotions. Everyone's fascinated by their emotions because we think that's who we are. We're afraid that if we let our attachment to them go, we'll be nobody. Which of course we are. When you wander into your ideas, your hopes, your dreams, turn back, not just once but 10,000 times if need be, 1,000,000 times if need be. 24. Dukkha, suffering and dissatisfaction, anicca, impermanence, and anatta, no eternal self, become apparent during the process of meditation. As one use the practice, the mind becomes calm, clear, attentive, flexible, and free from the disturbances of likes and dislikes. The next step is to carry this same type of mindfulness over into every activity of everyday life. Devotional practices in addition to the contemplative and philosophical traditions described above, many lay Buddhists and also many monastic practitioners of Theravada Buddhism in Southeast Asia are likely to turn to the Buddha in devotion, taking refuge in his protective presence and power. Temples, halls, and roadside shrines have been built with images of the Buddha before which people bow, light candles, burn incense, offer flowers, press bits of gold leaf onto the images, and make aspirations and prayers. Some monastics and intellectuals, including Protestant Christians who became interested in Buddhist studies in the late 19th century, have labeled such practices antithetical to the spirit of Buddhism, which they understand as rationalistic, philosophical, non-ritualistic, non-iconic, and non-theistic. Despite the increasing commercialization of Buddhist imagery, some commentators are now trying to trace the history of image-oriented worship. Devotional practices are so widespread and so influential in popular Buddhist practice that scholars have begun to examine them as perhaps being part of the mainstream of Buddhism after all. A key text in this regard is the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, a Pali scripture that describes the Buddha's cremation and the dispersal of his relics. The text also deals with the issue of devotionalism, recounting that, before his death, the Buddha recommended the commemoration of his relics alongside dedicated practice of the Dharma. Whoever lays wreaths or puts sweet perfumes and colors with a devout heart will reap benefit and happiness for a long time. 25. Simultaneously, the text advocates devotion to the Dharma as a way of respect. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD 152 November 2015, 1336. Buddhism 153. In revering and paying homage to the Buddha. When lay Buddhists recite the refuge formula, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, they may experience this refuge not merely as a philosophical idea, but as a way of connecting with the timeless presence of the Buddha. In one popular ritual in northern Thailand, a network of threads attached to a large statue of the Buddha is used in special ceremonies to conduct his spiritual power to the Sangha, holy water, amulets, or new images to be consecrated. The 108 squares formed overhead by the strings are believed to form a magical cosmos whose sacred energy touches the earth through cords hanging downward. People may wrap these cords around their heads during the chanting of sutras by monks and thus receive spiritual blessings. To consecrate new images of the Buddha, monks initially seal them by closing the eyes with beeswax and covering the heads with cloth. Throughout the night, they chant, meditate, and teach about the Buddha and the Dharma as a way to train their minds and also consecrate the images. In the process, the members of the Sangha are also drawn into a strong sense of unity with the Buddha, the Dharma, and each other. At sunrise, the coverings are removed from the images, and they are offered milk and sweet rice. In a sense, they are now living presences. Similarly, followers may consider the Buddha's power to be present in his relics, bits of hair, nails, teeth, bones, and ashes from his cremated body. Such relics or images of the Buddha may be placed in stupas, reliquary mounds reaching toward the sky, a practice perhaps derived from earlier indigenous spiritual traditions. For instance, a tiny bone chip believed to be a relic of the Buddha is enshrined at Doi Suthep Temple in Chiang Mai in Thailand. To share this sacred relic with the people, the ruler is said to have placed it on the back of a white elephant, a legendary symbol of the Buddha, in the belief that the elephant would choose the best place for the temple. The elephant climbed a nearby hill until it reached the auspicious spot and went down on its knees. Today, flocks of pilgrims climb the 290 steps to the temple and request blessings by acts such as stupas, such as these bell-shaped monuments in Borobudur, Java, may house relics or statues of the Buddha and are sacred places for pilgrimage. M05136186186_CH05.INDD153 20th of November 2015 1336. 154 Buddhism. Pressing squares of gold leaf onto an image of the Buddha, lighting 3 sticks of incense to honor the triple gem, lighting candles, and offering flowers. So great are the powers associated with relics that huge processions carrying what is thought to be the Buddha's tooth relic have been used by the governments in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, Burma, to legitimize their claims to temporal power. There is no evidence of worship of images of the Buddha during his lifetime. Early Buddhist art depicts only an empty seat under the Bodhi tree where the Buddha attained enlightenment, or symbols representing other events in his life. A lotus flower or elephant for his birth, a wheel or 2 deer kneeling before a throne for his first sermon. What was thought to be the Buddha's last footprint, impressed into a stone, was later worshipped by King Ashoka, and its replicas also became objects of worship. Images of the Buddha himself were not used until the 1st century BCE at the earliest, and were not standardized until about the 5th century CE. Now cherished images of the Buddha proliferate in temples and roadside shrines. The shrines are almost identical to the indigenous spirit shrines that are still quite common in Thailand, where Buddhism is frequently combined with indigenous spirituality and Brahmanism. These physical images are a reminder of the Buddha's teachings and give a sense of his protective, guiding presence. In Southeast Asia, aspects of Theravada Buddhism are often adopted by shamans for greater efficacy in healing rituals. In Sri Lanka, the Yakaduras invoke the power of the Buddha and the Dharma to ward off evil spirits and help cure spiritually afflicted people. In the cosmic hierarchy, the Buddha and the Dharma are considered powerful and therefore useful in subduing lesser forces. During healing rituals, patients listen to Buddhist stories to help free themselves from afflictions and obtain protection by the power of the mind. Even monks are regarded as magical protectors of sorts, and followers frequently request chanted blessings for protection. As in all Buddhist cultures, Buddhist temples are important centers for community identity and integration. There the monks not only teach the Dharma, but also preside over agricultural festivals to improve the harvest, ceremonies to assist the dead to achieve a better rebirth, and ceremonies to invoke the blessings of the deities. All these events generate a festive atmosphere and communal joy. The monks and nuns help the people accumulate merit or spiritual benefits and share them with others. Ashin Nayana Deepa, a monk from Myanmar, Burma, explains the idea of transferring merit. A relic purported to be a tooth of the Buddha is so revered that it is carried on an elephant palanquin in a huge yearly procession in Sri Lanka. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD154 the 20th of November 2015 1336. Buddhism 155. When we concentrate, our mind is purified. The purified mind can transmit 4. It is stable. I can share if I have already done good deeds for the people, such as teaching them vipassana. It is like a wire. Without wire, electricity cannot pass. The wire is concentration, the electricity is loving kindness. We have to use concentration and send benefits with loving kindness. You have a bank account. So I put something into your bank account to fill it. Like a candle, one gives light to another. Then the light is more and more. My light will not be reduced, it will be more and more. You also get more, I also get more. Sometimes when I meditate, I see your face in my mind. When I see your face, I want to see your face happy. I don't want you to be in trouble. So I'm sending my merits, let it be good. 26. Mahayana, compassion and wisdom. Additional Buddhist practices and teachings began to appear in a wide range of scriptures from the early centuries CE. These further developments in thought and practice gradually evolved into what is called Mahayana, the great vehicle. The Mahayana scriptures emphasize the practice of compassion and wisdom by both monastics and laypeople toward the goal of liberating all sentient beings from dukkha. The Mahayana traditions honor all the teachings set forth in the Pali Canon and, in addition, accept the extensive Mahayana literature originally found in Sanskrit and later translated into Chinese, Tibetan, and other languages, eventually leading to the development of canons for 5 different Mahayana schools. This literature praises the deeds and qualities of innumerable Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and inspires practitioners to develop the compassion and wisdom needed to become Bodhisattvas and eventually Buddhas themselves. The Mahayana scriptures emphasize the importance of religious experience. For the Mahayanist, the Dharma is the source of a transformative experience that awakens the quest for enlightenment as the greatest value in life and seeks to embody the Dharma in every aspect of life. Each of the many schools within Mahayana offers a special set of methods or skillful means for awakening. These methods are quite varied, but the Mahayana traditions share many common characteristics. The Mahayana traditions also share many rituals and monastic practices with the Theravada school. Bodhisattvas and early Mahayana scripture, the Lotus Sutra, defended its seemingly innovative ideas by claiming that earlier teachings were skillful means for those with lower capacities. The idea is that the Buddha geared his teaching to the 1 million monk Dhammakaya temple in Thailand. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD155 the 20th of November 2015 1336. 156 Buddhism. His audience, and that his teachings were presented in different ways and at different levels of completeness in accordance with the readiness of his audience to understand them. One of the most significant new interpretations introduced by the Lotus Sutra regards the eternal Buddha. According to the Lotus Sutra, common people believe that Buddha was born a prince and learned the way to enlightenment as a mendicant. Actually, Buddha has always existed in the world, which is without beginning or end. As the eternal Buddha, he has known all people and applied all methods of relief. There is no falsity in the eternal Dharma which Buddha taught, for he knows all things in the world as they are, and he teaches them to all people. Buddha alone truly and fully knows the world as it is, and he never says that it is true or false, or good or evil. He simply portrays the world as it is. What Buddha does teach is this, that all people should cultivate roots of virtue, according to their natures, their deeds, and their beliefs. 27. The Lotus Sutra and other new Mahayana scriptures also taught that there was a higher goal than the Arhat's achievement of liberation, namely, to aspire to become a bodhisattva. Theravada Buddhists use the term bodhisattva to refer to the Buddha in his past lives and up to the time he attained enlightenment. Mahayana Buddhists speak of the bodhisattva as a being who has taken a vow to become fully enlightened in the future, a fully awakened Buddha, and who will assist others in their liberation as they work to complete their vow. The Lotus Sutra says that all beings have the capacity for Buddhahood and are destined to attain it eventually. Both monastics and laity are urged to take the bodhisattva vow and work to become fully enlightened. Today, Mahayana Buddhists in East Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, China, Mongolia, Sikkim, Tibet, India, Laos, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, Myanmar, Burma, Bhutan, Nepal, Taiwan. Map showing the approximate distribution of forms of Buddhism in the world today. M05136186186_CH05.INDD156 the 20th of November 2015 1336. Buddhism 157. Asha expressed this commitment in the Four Great Bodhisattva Vows, compiled in China in the 6th century CE by Tiantai Zai, founder of the Tiantai school. Beings are infinite in number, I vow to save them all. The obstructive passions are endless in number, I vow to end them all. The teachings for saving others are countless, I vow to learn them all. Buddhahood is the supreme achievement, I vow to attain it. His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, representing the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, says, the motivation to achieve Buddhahood in order to save all sentient beings is really a marvelous determination. That person becomes very courageous, warm-hearted, and useful in society. 28. Soen Nakagawa Roshi, from the Japanese Zen tradition, says, you are not just here for yourself alone, but for the sake of all sentient beings. Keep your mind pure and warm. 29. The concept of the selfless bodhisattva is not just an ideal for earthly conduct. Numerous bodhisattvas are believed to be present and available to hear the devotees' petitions. As emanations of wisdom and compassion, they are sources of inspiration and blessing on the path to Buddhahood. For karmic purification and removal of inner obstruct tie-ins to enlightenment and bodhisattvahood, aspirants are taught to practice the 10 perfections, paramitas: generosity, morality, renunciation, transcendental wisdom, energy and diligent effort, patience and forbearance, truthfulness, determination, loving kindness, and serene equanimity. The most popular bodhisattva in East Asia is Avalokiteshvara, known as Guanyin in China, Kannon in Japan, who symbolizes compassion and extends blessings to all. Although he is depicted as male in India, the Lotus Sutra says that this bodhisattva takes whatever form is needed to help others, and lists 32 examples. In East Asia, Avalokiteshvara is typically depicted as female, often as the bestower or protector of young children. In one hand, she holds a vase with the nectar of compassion, in the other, she holds a willow branch symbolizing her healing powers. An image of the bodhisattva holding a baby has become especially popular in East Asia as a source of inspiration and blessing for women and children. She may also be depicted standing serenely atop a dragon in a turbulent ocean. The storm-tossed ocean and dragon are symbols of the upheavals of life and within our minds. Guanyin is therefore a model of the inner strength, equilibrium, and self-control with which these turbulences can be mastered. The three bodies of Buddha. The Thera Veda tradition emphasizes that the Buddha is an historical figure who taught the Dharma as a guide to liberation from suffering, then died like any other human being, leaving behind a body of teachings. By contrast, in the Mahayana tradition, the Buddha came to be regarded as the embodiment of enlightened awareness. Metaphysically, the Buddha is said to be an immanent presence in the universe with three aspects, or bodies. The first aspect is the formless enlightened wisdom of a Buddha. The second is the body of bliss of a Buddha, an aspect that communicates the Dharma to bodhisattvas, and the third is the Many Buddhists anticipate the coming of Maitreya, the Buddha of the future, to re-establish the purity of the Dharma. This statue of Maitreya is in Thixi Monastery, Ladakh. Guanyin, hearer of cries, Bodhisattva of mercy, as depicted in statues in a Hong Kong temple. M05136186186_CH05.INDD157 20th of November 2015 1337. 158 Buddhism. Emanation body, whereby a Buddha manifests in countless forms to help liberate suffering beings. It was in such an emanation body that the Buddha appeared for a time on the earth as the historical figure Shakyamuni Buddha. In Mahayana, the Buddhas are seen to embody perfect purity, boundless compassion, omniscient wisdom, and many other enlightened qualities. Although some may interpret the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as metaphors for various aspects of enlightened awareness, others regard them as living presences that are able to impart blessings and guidance to those who call on them. Both Theravada and Mahayana are non-theistic in that the existence or non-existence of gods is not a primary concern, yet ordinary people are inclined to seek help from them in times of need. Mahayana scriptures portray Buddhas and Bodhisattvas moving swiftly through intergalactic space and time, appearing in multiple forms at different end-world systems simultaneously. In the Tibetan tradition, for example, the 14th Dalai Lama is regarded as a human emanation of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Many Tibetan monks, nuns, and laypeople followed him into exile after the communist takeover of Tibet and have set up a community in the mountains of northern India, in Dharamsala, to be near him. Practitioners are not to be attached to these appearances, but receive teachings and draw great inspiration from them. Emptiness. As in Theravada, the Mahayana schools understand ultimate reality as the true nature of things. This suchness is not an absolute, but the absence of a permanent, independent reality. In accordance with the universal law of cause and effect, all conditioned phenomena arise and perish continuously, and for lack true existence. In the Udana scripture from the Pali Canon, the Buddha states, "O monks, there is an unborn, undying, unchanging, uncreated. If it were not so, there would be no point to life or to training. But here the Buddha is referring to nirvana, a non-regressive state of liberation from mental afflictions. Jizo is a much-loved bodhisattva in Japan. One of his new forms is Mizuko Jizo, the guardian of unborn, stillborn, aborted, and miscarried babies, whose parents seek his protection for them by adorning small Jizo statues. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD158 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 159. Suffering and rebirth rather than to an eternal, independently existing reality. Shunyata, meaning emptiness or voidness, is the most complex and profound of the Mahayana teachings. The concept of shunyata was elaborated by the Indian philosopher Nagarjuna around the 2nd and 3rd century CE on the basis of the perfection of wisdom scriptures. According to Nagarjuna, compound things have no independent existence and no eternal reality. All composite phenomena arise and pass away, dependent on causes and conditions. The world, a phenomena, is therefore empty of true or inherent existence, even though we may mistakenly experience the world as real in everyday, conventional life. Nagarjuna wrote that while on the conventional level, the Four Noble Truths are real, for dukkha is a part of human life, on the ultimate level even the Four Noble Truths are empty, devoid of any inherent or permanent existence. Insight into emptiness is similar to the insight into no-self that arises when we observe the arising and passing away of the elements of mind and body during vipassana meditation. Insight into emptiness also arises by understanding the dependent nature of thought constructs and freeing our minds from fixed concepts. Everything being empty, there is nothing to cling to, so one who realizes emptiness is free to experience reality directly and to be compassionate without attachment. The concepts of selflessness and emptiness help practitioners understand things as they are, and also help them overcome attachment to things, including attachment to concepts. Some people may wonder, if everything is ultimately empty, what is the point of action? The teaching on emptiness does not mean we do nothing, but that we are not attached to the results of our actions. Emptiness is always paired with compassion, skillful means, and the wish to benefit all living beings. Zen teacher Dainin Katagiri advised, broadly speaking, without desire, how can we survive in this world? Using our knowledge, we consider carefully what to do next. And then whatever we decide to do, let's just do it, do our best to accomplish it from the beginning to the end. That's all we have to do. Immediately, see the result and accept it. Just continue to sow good seeds from moment to moment. 30. The perfection of wisdom scriptures that celebrate the liberating experience of emptiness are foundational texts for most Mahayana schools. What is distinct and startling about Mahayana is the application of the idea of emptiness to all things. Even the teachings of the Buddha and emptiness itself are empty of true existence. In the Heart Sutra, which is recited in all Mahayana schools, the core doctrines of traditional Buddhism are also deconstructed. Avalokiteshvara sees that the five aggregates of a person, form, feelings, perceptions, karmic formations, and consciousness are empty of true existence because they exist in relation to and dependent on other phenomena. With this realization, the Bodhisattva becomes free of delusion. Next, birth and death, purity and defile, increase and decrease are understood to be empty, the six sense objects, the six sense organs, and the six types of consciousness are empty, life and death are empty, the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path are empty. Even knowledge and attainment are proclaimed to be empty. With this and perfection of wisdom, there are no obstacles and no fear. Having seen through the illusion of true existence of even the core Buddhist teachings, one attains nirvana. In the Heart Sutra, this realization culminates in the mantra, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate. Body, Svaha. Gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond, awakened. So be it. As Professor David Chappell observed, the systematic emptying of the central doctrines of the tradition is unparalleled in religious history. Imagine a Christian saying that the Ten Commandments and Lord's Prayer and Apostles' Creed are empty, and yet insight into the impermanence of all things and their connectedness gives Mahayana a self-critical profundity and an inclusive acceptance of diversity which provides balance in the midst of movement and peace in the midst of compassion. 31. M051_P136186_CH05.INDD159 the 20th of November 2015 1337. 160 Buddhism Mahayana in East Asia. What Mahayana schools developed in East Asia? Buddhism was transmitted from India to China beginning around the 1st century CE and thence to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. The major schools of East Asian Buddhism are part of the Mahayana branch. Many of these schools have also absorbed elements from other East Asian religions, such as Taoism, Korean, shamanic practices, and Shinto. Chan and Zen, the Great Way of Enlightenment. Around the 5th century CE, according to tradition, a South Indian monk named Bodhidharma traveled to a monastery in northern China, where he reportedly spent 9 years in silent meditation, facing the wall. He became recognized as the first patriarch of the radical path that came to be called Chan Buddhism, from the Sanskrit word dhyana, meaning meditation. Although traditional accounts of Bodhidharma's life and contributions may not be completely factual, they illustrate the emphasis on meditation and direct insight that characterize the Mahayana school of Chan Buddhism, which became the most successful form of Buddhism in China. Bodhidharma's legendary practice became emblematic of a firm determination to reach enlightenment through sitting meditation. In lines attributed to Bodhidharma, Chan Buddhism is described as directly pointing to the human mind, achieving Buddhahood by seeing one's nature. 32. The Chan school was transmitted to Japan, where it is known as Zen. Zen claims to preserve the essence of the Buddha's teachings through direct experience, triggered by mind-to-mind transmission of the Dharma. Instead of focusing on scriptures, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, Zen emphasizes direct insight into the true nature of one's own mind to reveal one's own Buddha nature. Direct insight results from Zazen, sitting meditation. To sit, said the 6th Zen patriarch, means to obtain absolute freedom and not to allow any thought to be caused by external objects. To meditate means to realize the imperturbability of one's original nature. 33. A 16th century Zen rock garden with raked gravel in the Daitoki-ji temple complex in Kyoto. The garden is to be contemplated as a miniature and symbolic landscape of mountains, islands, land, and sea. M05136186186_CH05.INDD160 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 161. The Great Way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. Section 34. In Zen, instructions in the manner of sitting are quite rigorous to avoid distracting the mind. One must maintain an upright posture and not move during the meditation period. Skillful means are then applied to make the mind one-pointed and clear. The initial practice is simply to watch and count each inhalation and exhalation from 1 to 10, starting over from 1 if anything other than awareness of the breath enters the mind. Although this practice sounds simple, the mind is so restless that many people must work for months before finally getting to 10 without having to start over. Getting to 10 is not really the goal is the process itself, the process of recognizing what comes up in the mind and gently letting it go without attachment or preferences. As one practices Zazen, undisturbed by phenomena, one becomes inward. Lie calm and the natural mind is revealed in its original purity. This original mind is spacious and free, like an open sky. Thoughts and sensations may float through it like clouds, but they then disappear, leaving no trace. What remains? Major branches of Buddhism. Although some scholars classify Vajrayana as a form of Mahayana Buddhism, many consider it a separate branch. Gautama Buddha c. 5th century BCE. Development of early Buddhist schools. Theravada, School of Elders, etc. c. 250 BCE. Development of Mahayana, Great Vehicle, Schools c. 100 CE. Vajrayana c. 500 CE India. 749 CE Tibet. Chan, China. c. 500 CE. Zen, Japan. c. 1200 CE. Pure Land, China. c. 500 CE. Jodo Shinshu, Japan. c. 1200 CE. Humanistic Buddhism, Taiwan. Japan, China. From 20th c. Shingon, Japan. c. 800 CE. Nichiren, Japan. c. 1250 CE. Soka Gakkai, 1945. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD161 the 20th of November 2015 1337. 162 Buddhism is insight into a thusness, the true nature of things. In some Zen schools, this perception of thusness comes in a sudden burst of insight, or kensho. When the mind is calm, action becomes spontaneous and natural. Zen practitioners are taught to rest in the natural simplicity of their own Buddha nature. It is said that 2 Zen monks, on gaining a glimpse of enlightenment, ran naked through the woods scribbling on rocks. On the other hand, the Zen tradition links spontaneity with intense, disciplined concentration. In the art of calligraphy, the perfectly spontaneous brushstroke is executed with the whole body in a single breath, yet this is the outcome of years of attentive practice. Being fully present in the moment, when pouring tea, being aware only of pouring tea, is simplicity itself. Whether painting, serving tea, sweeping, or simply breathing, the unconditioned thusness of life is fully revealed. Another tool used in the Rinzai Zen tradition is the koan. Attention is focused ardently on a question that boggles the mind, such as what was your original face before your parents were born? As Roshi Philip Kapleau observes, koans deliberately throw sand into the eyes of the intellect to force us to open our mind's eye and see the world and everything in it undistorted by our concepts and judgments. To concentrate on a koan, one must look closely and experience it directly, without thinking about it. The experience is immediate, beyond abstractions. Roshi Kapleau explains, the import of every koan is the same, that the world is one interdependent whole and that each separate one of us is that whole. 35. The aim of Zen practice is enlightenment, often experience as the flash of insight known as satori. One directly experiences the interrelatedness of all existence, often in a sudden recognition that nothing is separate from one self. As one Zen master put it, the moon's the same old moon, the flowers exactly as they were, yet I've become the thingness of all the things I see. 36. The tea ceremony in Japan is a ritual way of inculcating direct awareness, simplicity, and self-restraint. In the 12th century, Chinese Chan, Japanese Zen masters, developed a series of 10 images that suggest the seeker's path to enlightenment. The image of an ox is used to represent the untamed mind. In this, the 6th image of the series, the seeker has found and tamed the ox, a metaphor for spiritual practice, and now comfortably rides upon it, playing his flute. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD162 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 163. All aspects of life become, at the same time, utterly precious and utterly empty, nothing special. This paradox cannot be grasped intellectually, it can only be realized through direct intuitive awareness. Pure Land, devotion to Amitabha Buddha. Chan Zen is a practice of inner awareness with close attention given to every action and requires years of disciplined meditation. Other forms of Buddhist practice developed in India and East Asia that had greater appeal. One of the most popular Buddhist Mahayana schools in East Asia is Pure Land Buddhism. At times of great social upheaval, for instance, when the government became corrupt and society was falling apart, it was widely thought that people had become so degenerate that it was nearly impossible for them to attain enlightenment through their own efforts. Under the circumstances, many became devoted to Amitabha Buddha, the Buddha of boundless light. It was believed that Amitabha, Amida in Japanese, was previously a prince who vowed to attain enlightenment. After he did so, he used his pure virtue to manifest a pure land of bliss for all those who called his name. In Japan, the original abstract Indian Buddhist concept of a pure land in the West to which devotees return after death became more concrete. The Japanese had an ancient tradition of worshipping mountains as destinations, which the dead ascend and from which deities descend to earth. They began to depict Amida riding on billowing clouds over the mountains and welcoming his dying devotees. Amida Buddha, center, depicted beyond the mountains, ready to welcome dying devotees to the Pure Land. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD163 the 20th of November 2015 1337. 164 Buddhism. Jodo Shinshu, the true Pure Land in the 13th century, the Japanese. Monk Shinran broke with monastic tradition by marrying. He emphasized the principle that salvation comes through repeating the name of Amida Bud. Da, the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, with sincere trust and devotion, not by separating oneself from society. The Jodo Shinshu, or True Pure Land school developed by Shinran's followers became a major Buddhist movement throughout the world. Unlike other Buddhist sects in Japan, it did not mix its beliefs with those of Shinto, nor did its practitioners accept donations for prayers and blessings. It became the most popular form of Buddhism practiced in Japan. It is the most popular Buddhist school among Japanese immigrants and their descendants in North America, with well-established communities also in Europe, Australia, and Africa. Nichiren, salvation through the Lotus Sutra. While some Buddhists in Japan despaired of achieving enlightenment through their own efforts and therefore relied on the grace of Amida Buddha, others stressed the importance of striving to enlighten not only ourselves but also Soki Eti. One example was a 13th century fisherman's son who named himself Nichiren. For Nichiren, the highest truths of Buddhism were embodied in the Lotus Sutra's compilation of parables, verses, and descriptions of innumerable beings who practiced the Buddha's teachings. Nichiren gave particular attention to two of these beings, the Bodhisattva of superb action, who staunchly devotes himself to spreading the perfect truth, and the Bodhisattva ever abused, who is persecuted because of his insistence, with unshaken conviction, that each person is potentially a Buddha. Nichiren himself was repeatedly abused by the authorities, but persisted in his efforts to reform Buddhism in Japan and spread what he considered its purified essence, the Bodhisattva ideal, to the world. The phrase chanted by Nichiren and his followers, Namu Myoho Renjekyo, pays homage to the Lotus Sutra. Today it is chanted by Nichiren monks, nuns, and lay people for hours. The chant is thought to slowly reveal the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra and to work inwardly, beyond thought. In our time, some Nichiren followers undertake long peace walks. In one peace effort sponsored by Nipponzan Myohoji in 1995, people walked from Auschwitz in Poland to Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, making a plea for non-violence and respect for all of life. They beat hand drums while chanting Namu Myoho Renjekyo and bowed to the Buddha in each person they met, whether friendly or not, as a contribution to world peace. The founder of Nipponzan Myohoji, the most venerable Nikidatsu Fuji, strongly influenced Gandhi's doctrine of non-violence. Before he passed away in 1985 at the age of 100, he explained, "We do not believe that people are good because we see that they are good, but by believing that people are good we eliminate our own fear and thus we can intimately associate with them." To believe in the compassionate power of the Supreme Being which we cannot see is a discipline in order to believe in the invisible good in others. 37. Civilization has nothing to do with having electric lights, airplanes, or manufacturing atomic bombs. It has nothing to do with killing human beings, destroying things, or waging war. Civilization is to hold one another in mutual affection and respect. 38. The chanting of Namu Myoho Rengekyo has led to more than 70 peace pagodas being built in many countries with donated materials and labor by people of all faiths who pray for world peace and the elimination of all weapons. Soka Gakkai International is another important offshoot of Nichiren's movement, which is based in Japan but has millions of members around the world. Its founders call for a peaceful world revolution through transformation of individual consciousness. They combine the central practice of chanting Nam Myoho M05_P136186_CH05.INDD164 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 165. Living Buddhism. An interview with Noriyuki Ogi. Noriyuki Ogi is a young writer and translator now working in Tokyo at a society dedicated to propagating the teachings of Buddha. He is very kind and generous in devoting his time and energy to help others. He explains, "I'm in the 14th generation of a Buddhist family. I was born in the temple family of Chishoji Temple. All my ancestors were Buddhist priests. In 10 years, when I'm 40, I will be the abbot of my temple. I want to have a good relationship with the members. I want to help them realize the good life and the truth in life. And I will try to ease their suffering. I want to make the temple the center of the community. That's my dream." When Japan faced a financial crisis, everybody had to save their money. People couldn't go abroad. But then they realized we don't need to go outside because we have such a rich culture in our country. To me, Amida Buddha is the invisible supporting power. My experience goes back to my childhood. I loved my grandmother. It's because of her that I encountered the teaching of Buddha. She passed away when I was only 10 years old. I was so sad. A guy came to greet me. He said, "You know how to greet, how to speak, how to sit up straight, just like your grandmother." Then I realized how Buddha's teachings light our lives. Buddha's power, Buddha's light may be an invisible support in my life, in my kindness. I don't ask Amida Buddha for anything for myself. I just give appreciation. I say, I give thanks for the teaching of Buddha. I thank you for helping my life, supporting my life. That's the meaning of reciting the name of Amida Buddha, which originally means immeasurable life and light. I have a small Buddhist altar in my room. Every morning and every evening before going to bed, I recite the name of Amida Buddha and express my appreciation by saying Namu Amida Butsu. I Take refuge in Amida Buddha. In the morning I say, thank you very much for making me alive this morning, and then I try to live that day with gratitude as much as possible. And then before going to bed, I try to reflect on myself. Sometimes I'm so selfish, so I try to be selfless for the next day. I can be called a Buddhist priest. When I was 20 years old, I went to Nishiyama Betsuin Temple to get the qualification of Buddhist priest of Jodo Shinshu, Shin Buddhist tradition. I shaved my hair and I got ordained. On special occasions, such as memorial services or funerals, I wear ceremonial robes for rituals, but usually I don't, because now I am working as a businessman. Almost 100 families belong to my temple in my hometown. That means probably at least 300 people are supporting my temple, so I have to take care of them by rituals, by counseling. For me, they're not just members of the temple, they're more like family. But it is difficult for temple families to support themselves in the countryside because of the depopulation of their villages. In Japan, temple income depends on donations from temple members. This tradition used to be taken over by the next generations, but young people started to move to big cities like Tokyo to get jobs, discarding their agriculture-related family works. They do not come back to their hometown and do not care about any Buddhist tradition. Countryside temples are losing members, and many temples might be closed in the future. Since my temple is quite small and doesn't have many members, my parents have to work outside the temple to financially support and renovate the dilapidated temple. However, they share the teachings of Shinran in their jobs and in the communities they serve, and many people have come to trust them and often visit my temple to get advice and support from my parents when trouble arises. As the 14th generation abbot of my temple, I want to spend my time serving the people of my area by sharing the message of Buddha. However, in order to financially support my temple, I am going to establish a Buddhist translation company. Today people are very busy, but they need more time to reflect on themselves. They need more invisible body. Before the earthquake, people just depended on materialism. Material results were everything to them. After the earthquake, they came to depend more on the invisible body, on kindness, on spiritual stuff. I think they need time to reflect on themselves through spiritual practice. Also, they need to cultivate their spiritual thoughts, their spiritual ideas, because that may be helpful for them when they face a lot of problems. They have to train their hearts. Because of Buddha's teachings, my heart has changed a lot. I want to share this wonderful experience with everybody so that other people might be able to experience what I received. What changed with Buddha's teaching is that now I'm not thinking about myself. I think more about others. I realized that everybody is interconnected. We are not alone. That's why I want to help open other people's blind eyes, so they may realize how wonderful a life we are living. 39. M05136186186_CH05.INDD165 the 20th of November 2015 1337. 166 Buddhism. Renjekyo with modern social activism in areas such as humanitarian relief, environmental awareness, human rights, literacy, and cultural and interfaith exchanges. Members are encouraged to develop their unlimited potential for hope, courage, and altruism. Another new branch of Buddhism inspired by the Lotus Sutra is Risho Kossikai, founded in Japan in the 1930s by Rev. Nikkyo Niwano and Myoko Naganuma. They sought to bring the message of the Lotus Sutra to the world in practical ways in order to encourage happiness and peace. Members chant the Lotus Sutra every day, skip a meal several times a month, and donate the money for aid and peace projects, and meet twice a month in circles to discuss ways of applying the Buddha's teachings to specific problems in their own lives. Based on the Lotus Sutra's understanding of the eternal Buddha as the great life force of the universe, 40 Risho Kossikai tries to cooperate with people and organizations of other religions. Its mission statement asserts, truth is universal and all religions are manifestations of it. All life springs from the same source, and thus all people are related and belong to one family. The Lotus Sutra declares that everyone is inherently imbued with the Bodhisattva wish. 41. The organization therefore is very active in international interreligious ties. The Bodhisattva loves all living beings as if each were his only child. Vimalakirtina Desha Sutra 5. Vajrayana, the indestructible path. How does Vajrayana differ from Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism? Although some scholars classify it as a form of Mahayana Buddhism, many consider Vajrayana a separate branch. Followers of Vajrayana call it the third turn. Ingla, the wheel of Dharma, with the early schools that included Theravada being the first and the Mahayana schools the second. Vajrayana developed in India, was transmitted to Tibet, and has also historically been practiced in Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, and Mongolia. Currently it is practiced throughout the Tibetan diaspora and increasingly in North America and Europe, where it is one of the most popular forms of Buddhism practiced by Westerners. Prior to the introduction of Buddhism from India, the mountainous Tibetan region was home to a shamanic religion called Bon. In the 7th century CE, a particularly powerful Tibetan king named Songtsen became interested in Buddhism and sent a group of students to India to study it. The journey from Tibet to India was extremely difficult, and many of these emissaries died in the searing heat of the Indian plains. Only one member of a second group survived the arduous trip across the Himalayas, returning with many Sanskrit texts. After some of these works were translated into Tibetan, Songtsen declared Buddhism the national religion and encouraged Buddhist virtues in his subjects. Bon Pro opponents are said to have sabotaged the new religion until finally a tantric adept, Padmambhava, was invited to Tibet in the 8th century CE. Eventually, it is said Guru Padmambhava subdued and converted the local Bon deities and, along with his consort Yeshe Tsogyal, firmly established Buddhist teachings in Tibet. Although the Tibetans' understanding of Buddhism was no doubt influenced by earlier beliefs, an element such as the use of prayer flags and an emphasis on practices for the dying may reflect Bon concerns, the Tibetans spent many centuries attempting to understand the Indian Buddhist teachings as purely as possible. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD166 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 167. Religion in public life. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, surely one of the best known and most loved spiritual leaders in the world, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama is a striking example of Buddhist peace and compassion. Wherever he goes, he greets everyone with evident delight. Even when addressing an audience of thousands, he looks around the hall with a broad, childlike grin, which seems directed to each person individually. His example is all the more powerful because he is the leader in exile of Tibet, a small nation that experienced extreme oppression and suffering during the 20th and 21st centuries. The simplicity of His Holiness's words and bearing belie his intellectual power. His Holiness was a peasant child just 2 years old in 1937 when he was located and carefully identified as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama. He was formally installed as the 14th Dalai Lama when he was only 4.5 years old, thus becoming the spiritual and temporal ruler of Tibet. He was raised and rigorously educated in the Potala in Lhasa, capital of Tibet. One of the world's largest buildings, with more than 1,000 rooms. The Potala contained large ceremonial halls, 35 chapels, meditation cells, government storehouses, national treasures, a complete record of Tibetan history and culture in 7,000 volumes, plus thousands of illuminated volumes of the Buddhist scriptures. The young Dalai Lama was educated according to the traditional Tibetan Buddhist system, which stressed an extensive and profound method for developing the mind to acquire many kinds of knowledge and also to practice advanced Buddhist meditation techniques. Such a rigorous grounding in religious education and practice maintains the Dalai Lama brings steadiness of mind in the face of any misfortunes. He says, humanitarianism and true love for all beings can only stem from an awareness of the content of religion. By whatever name religion may be known, its understanding and practice are the essence of a peaceful mind and therefore of a peaceful world. If there is no peace in one's mind, there can be no peace in one's approach to others, and thus no peaceful relations between individuals or between nations. 42. The Dalai Lama's equanimity of mind was seriously challenged by the Chinese invasion and oppression of his small country. in 1959 when he escaped from Tibet to India in hopes of preventing bloodshed during a widespread popular revolt against the Chinese. Tibet was home to more than 6,000 monasteries. Only 12 of them were still intact by 1980. It is said that at least 1 million Tibetans died as a direct result of the Chinese occupation, violence and suppression of the religion, culture, and people of Tibet continue today, as millions of Chinese settlers fill the country. In the face of the overwhelming military power of the Chinese, and armed with Buddhist precepts, the Dalai Lama has persistently tried to steer his people away from violent response to violence, asserting that non-violence is the only way. It's a slower process, sometimes, but a very effective one, he explains. Practically speaking, through violence we may achieve something, but at the expense of someone else's welfare. That way, although we may solve one problem, we simultaneously seed a new problem. The best way to solve problems is through human understanding, mutual respect. On one side, make some concessions. On the other side, take serious consideration about the problem. There may not be complete satisfaction, but something happens. At least future danger is avoided. Non-violence is very safe. 43. The Dalai Lama has been an enthusiastic advocate for dialogue between religious practitioners and scientists, particularly with respect to efforts to study the effects of meditation and other spiritual practices, while slowly, patiently trying to influence world opinion so that the voice of Tibet will not be extinguished by Chinese might. The Dalai Lama has established an entire government in exile in Dharamsala, India, in the Himalayas. There he and Tibetan refugees have built schools, orphanages, hospitals, craft cooperatives, farming communities, monasteries, libraries, and institutes for preserving traditional music, drama, dance, painting, and medicine. From this base, he has traveled tirelessly around the world in an effort to keep the voice of Tibet alive. Although he relinquished his role as political leader in 2011, he remains the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhists and is recognized as one of the greatest moral leaders of our time. His quintessentially Buddhist message to people of all religions is that only through kindness and compassion toward each other and the cultivation of inner peace shall we survive as a species. M05136186186_CH05.INDD167 the 20th of November 2015 1337. 168 Buddhism. The Indian Buddhism that was transmitted to Tibet included elements of Tan Tra, ancient esoteric teachings and practices that could have been in existence in India since before 2500 BCE. These ways emphasize visualization, ritual, man, tras, mudras, hand positions during meditation, mandalas, sacred diagrams, and union of male and female energies for spiritual liberation, all under the strict guidance of a teacher. Lay Buddhists picked up these practices not only to invoke the aid of celestial Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but also to help in spiritual awakening and attainment of Buddhahood. As Indian Buddhism was carried to Tibet, there was a period of decline in the 10th century CE, when some misinterpreted the Tantric teachings. A teacher named Atisha was invited from the great center of Buddhist learning at Nalanda, India, to set things right. Under Atisha, Tibetan Buddhism became a complex path with 3 stages, said to have been prescribed by the Buddha. The first stage is quieting the mind and relinquishing attachments through meditation practice, as emphasized in the early Buddhist teachings. The second stage is intensive training in compassion and wisdom, as emphasized in the Mahayana teachings. The third stage is the advanced esoteric path called Vijnana, the diamond vehicle, or Tantrayana, a rigorous, accelerated path to nurture in light, meant within a single lifetime. Vijnana aspirants are guided through a series of tantric practices by qualified teachers, or lamas. Some of these teachers are recognized as incarnate bodhisattvas and are carefully trained from a young age to help others advance toward enlightenment. The masses have their heads on backwards. If you want to get things right, first, look at how they think and behave, and consider going the opposite way. 44. Lama Drum Tonpa, 11th century. Vijnana initiates practice deity yoga, meditating on themselves in the form of a Buddha or Bodhisattva in order to embody the enlightened qualities that the practitioner wishes to manifest. These radiant forms are themselves imagined, and therefore lacking true existence, but meditating on them is considered a senior Tibetan Buddhist nun teaches a complicated mudra to a young nun in Zanskar in the Indian Himalayas. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD168 20th of November 2015, 1337. Buddhism 169. Religion in practice. Death rites in Tibetan Buddhism. Venerable Tenzin Daidon, a Bhutanese nun, describes tradition surrounding death in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Traditionally, Tibetan Buddhists have not celebrated birthdays. People don't even know their birth date. They only know the year. Now, however, many young people have picked up Western ways and are expecting that their birthdays be celebrated. But according to the traditions, people's death anniversaries are celebrated rather than their birth anniversaries. When a dying person is almost going, a high lama, a monk or nun, or if they're not available, a lay practitioner is brought to read the Tibetan Book of the Dead into the ear of the person. The book is read part by part every day for 49 days following the death to guide the deceased. When the book is read, it tells the person not to be afraid and to know that it is because of our own mental delusions that we seem to see darkness or ghosts or lights of different colors. It also tells them which color of light to follow. Some colors of light will take the deceased toward hell, others toward animal birth, others toward the realms of gods and semigods, etc. People also prepare themselves for death while They are living by practicing power transference of consciousness. It not only helps us, but by practicing it, we are also able to help those who are passing away. We visualize the Buddha Amitabha above our crown, and visualize ourselves in Dakini, a female deity who transmits wisdom about secret teachings, form. We visualize that our consciousness lies in the heart of the Dakini. We eject our consciousness through our crown up to the Buddha, through his feet and up to his heart. If we are doing this for ourselves, we then bring it back into ourselves and then back up to his heart, which is transferring consciousness. If we are doing it for the dying person or one who has just passed away, we visualize them as a Dakini, also with the Buddha Amitabha above our crown. The only difference is we don't visualize their consciousness coming back again. If we have practiced power our whole life, then when we are dying we don't have to worry. We eject our consciousness to Amitabha Buddha, and this is how people go very peacefully. When a person is dying, we don't let people touch them because we want the consciousness to leave through the crown. Otherwise, the consciousness will be drawn somewhere else. I always carry around my neck a vial with a little bit of sand from a sand mandala to put on the person's crown at the time of death. Or sometimes people will pull a hair from the top of the crown to draw the consciousness there. When the outer breath is gone, the clinical death, the person has not yet died. It takes a few hours for the inner breath to go. During the first 49 days after a death, in addition to reading from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, people pray every 7 days for the consciousness, because every 7 days it passes away again and looks for a place to be reborn. If it doesn't get rebirth, it stays in the bardo, an intermediate state. Up until the 49th day, the family pray and offer butter lamps, give charity, and do many good actions to show the dead one the proper path to a better rebirth. Buddhahood is the ultimate goal, otherwise to be reborn in Buddha Amitabha Pure Land, and if not, at least in precious human rebirth. On the 49th day, the Lama will burn the name of the person and the painted photo of that person to help them understand that they have passed away, to separate their consciousness from the body, and to ask them to leave their relatives. When a person dies, we don't encourage crying and mourning by the relatives. If the people do that, the consciousness will not be able to see anything, will not be able to find the path, and will have a lot of anger and fear. Our prayers are like the sun and the butter lamps also help to light the way for them to the right path. If they are peaceful, they will be able to think of the good deeds they have done when they were living. If instead there is quarreling among the family after they die, they see all that. They will feel lots of anger and hatred, which will lead to a lower rebirth. They can see everything, but they can't touch us or feel us, as they are formless. We must be very quiet and peaceful at their death so that their mind is not disturbed. each year after the death for at least 3 years. Monks and nuns and higher lamas are invited to the home. They do a lot of prayers and offer butter lamps. They make an image of the deceased person, and when they offer food, we mention the person by name. We believe that once people have passed away, their consciousness will travel 9 times faster, and they are 9 times more intelligent than in life. We only have to mention their name, and they will be there. 45. Buddhism 169. M05136186186_CH05.INDD169 the 20th of November 2015 1337. 170 Buddhism. Way to understand one's own true nature. Some of these meditational deities are shown in wrathful form, such as Mahakala, defender of the Dharma, while others, such as Tara, are shown in peaceful form. The highest Vajrayana practices use the subtle vital energies of the body to transform the mind. A very subtle and profound state of consciousness is produced after lengthy practice when the gross mind is neutralized. The subtle mind manifests powerfully as the clear light of bliss. This innermost subtle mind of clear light is the true empty quality of one's own mind. Once it is realized, one is said to be capable of attaining Buddhahood in a single lifetime. The 7th Dalai Lama of Tibet, 1708 to 1757, gave this perspective. Even the most seemingly evil person has the primordial clear light mind at the heart of his or her existence. Eventually, the clouds of distortion and delusion will be cleared away as the being grows in wisdom, and the evil behavior that emanates from these negative mindsets will naturally evaporate. That being will realize the essential nature of his or her own mind and achieve spiritual liberation and enlightenment. 46. The practices used to transform the mind are also believed to enable supernormal powers such as levitation, clairvoyance, meditating continuously without sleep, and warming the body from within while sitting naked in the snow. Milarepa, the famous Tibetan poet saint, whose enlightenment was won through great austerities, once sang this song. Blissful within, I don't entertain the notion I'm suffering when incessant rain is pouring outside. Even on peaks of white snow mountains, amid swirling snow and sleet, driven by New Year's wintry winds, this cotton robe burns like fire. 47. One of the highest practitioners of Tantric Vajrayana was a woman, Yesha Tsogyal, the consort of Padmambhava, the powerful Tantric adept who had helped bring Buddhism to Tibet. According to a semi-historical biography writ 10 by an 18th century Tantric monk, Yesha Tsogyal was very beautiful, but wanted only a life of spiritual seeking. Her father nonetheless sent her out to be grabbed by rival suitors, from whom she escaped, but she was ultimately taken by the king. As the king's greatest desire was for spiritual liberation, he offered her to Padmambhava in exchange for his precious spiritual guidance. The two, Padmambhava and Yesha Tsogyal, were said to have practiced Tantra together in a remote cave, developing their extraordinary spiritual powers in an ecstatic dance of delight. Eventually Yesha Tsogyal went alone to practice severe austerities on the edge of a glacier where she faced the intense wind and cold without any clothing or food. When she returned to Padmanabhava after a year, he reportedly said, "O yogini who has mastered the Tantra, the human body is the basis of the accomplishment of wisdom, and the gross bodies of men and women are equally suited. But if a woman has strong aspiration, she has higher potential." 48. For centuries, Vajrayana was highly developed in Tibet, with an estimated 100,000 monks and nuns by the early 20th century. However, communist Chinese overran Tibet between 1950 and 1959, destroying countless ancient monasteries and scriptures and killing an estimated 1/6 of the population. Over decades of occupation, the beloved 14th Dalai Lama, spiritual and political leader of Tibet, escaped to India in 1959. The town of Dharamsala in the mountains of northern India, where he established his headquarters, has become one of the most beloved of Tibetan Buddhist deities is Tara. She is savior and mother of the world. She protects us and helps us to achieve our spiritual longings. Detail of Tibetan Thangka, 18th, 19th century. Tempera on cotton. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD170 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 171. A magnet for spiritual seekers. Despite persecution, religious practice and meaning still pervade every aspect of Tibetan life, from house raising to fervent pilgrimages. Monks and lay people alike meditate on thangkas and mandalas, visual aids to concentration and illumination, which portray Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and representations of an ideal universe. A favorite practice is the chanting of mantras, especially Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. This mantra evokes an awareness of the sufferings of sentient beings in different states of existence and compassion for all living beings from within the heart of each of us. To help manifest this compassion, mantras are repeatedly recited, written thousands of times, spun in prayer wheels, and printed on prayer flags so that the blessings of the mantra extend in all directions as they blow in the wind. In addition to Tibet, Vajrayana is practiced throughout the Himalayan region and beyond, in Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, Ladakh, Mongolia, and parts of Russia. Tibetan lamas in exile have also spread the Tibetan Buddhist tradition to Western countries, Southeast Asia, and Taiwan, where it has gained many adherents. Buddhist festivals. How do the different forms of Buddhism celebrate the Buddha's life? Since Buddhism has evolved into different forms in different countries, most of its festivals are not uniformly celebrated. The most important Buddhist festival is Vesak, which according to Theravadins marks the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and death, all of which were said to have miraculously occurred on the same day. For Mahayana Buddhists, Vesak marks the day of the Buddha's enlightenment. Vajrayana Buddhists celebrate for distinct days commemorating the Buddha's conception, birth, enlightenment, and death. According to The lunar calendar, the Buddha is said to have been born on the full moon of the month Vaisakha, the second month of the Indian calendar, which falls in April and May. In general, devout Buddhists gather at temples or monasteries before dawn to hear stories about the Buddha's life, to wash images of him, to make offerings of flowers, candles, and incense, and carefully to observe the 5 precepts, including refraining from any kind of killing. In several Buddhist majority countries, slaughterhouses and liquor shops are closed for the holiday by government decree. In Sri Lanka, thousands of insects, birds, and animals. Tibetan Buddhists full-length prostrations are so arduous that many have to strap on wooden pads and canvas shields to protect their bodies. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD171 the 20th of November 2015 1337 172 Buddhism. Are released as a symbolic act of liberation of all beings who are unwillingly imprisoned or tortured. In Japan, Shakyamuni Buddha's birthday, Hana Matsuri, is celebrated in early April, coinciding with the blooming of cherry blossoms. The happy celebrations follow the traditional story in which birds sang, flowers bloomed, and there was a sweet rain from the heavens when he was born in the garden of Lumbini. The baby is said to have taken 7 steps in each of the 4 directions, raised one hand to the sky and pointed downward with the other, and proclaimed his noble greatness and his mission of bringing peace to all suffering beings. In Buddhist temples, statues of a child in this pose are placed under flower-bedecked canopies representing the garden of Lumbini, and children pour sweet tea brewed from hydrangea flowers over the image of the little Buddha, symbolizing the sweet rain. There are also parades with images of the baby Buddha, a white elephant representing his mother's dream of an elephant just before he was born, and children wearing traditional Japanese clothes and carrying cherry blossoms. On the full moon day of the 3rd lunar month, Magha, approximately March, some Buddhists celebrate Magha Puja Day, also known as Sangha Day. It commemorates a major event early in the Buddha's teachings in which, after giving the sermon to his first disciples at the deer park in Sarnath, he went to the capital city of Rajagaha and preached to the king and more than 1,000 citizens. His sermon was so convincing that most took refuge in the new teaching, and the king donated a beautiful bamboo grove for the Sangha's use. With the monsoon comes the rainy season retreat for monks and nuns, Jia, in a period when it is traditionally difficult to walk through the countryside. In some countries, young laymen may temporarily enter the Sangha and live as monks for a while to consecrate their passage into adulthood. What happens during the rainy season retreat varies according to the teacher's instructions, but it is designed to turn one's mind away from worldly concerns and back to calm inner reflection. Vietnamese nun Q Nguyen describes her rainy season retreat pattern. I spend most of my day writing in a diary, reflecting upon myself and the world. Only in calm water do things reflect faithfully. I observe nature, people, listen carefully to the crickets and the fallen leaves as if they are the most important things now. 49. Vesak, Buddha's birthday, being celebrated in Seoul, Korea, with a Lantern Festival. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD172 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 173. After the rainy season retreat, lay people may ceremoniously offer new robes and other necessities to the monks and nuns, understanding that they are there by earning spiritual merit. Many other days are celebrated on local and national levels, such as the Festival of the Tooth in Sri Lanka, honoring the Buddha's tooth relic, which is normally hidden within a series of caskets in a special temple, but is on this day paraded through the streets on the back of a richly decorated elephant. See page 154. In Thailand, there is a special festival of floating bowls on the full moon night of the 12th lunar month. Bowls made of leaves and flowers with candles and incense sticks are floated upon the water of rivers and canals, which are especially full at this time. As people let them go, they feel that their bad luck is floating away. Buddhism in the West. Which factors may account for the growing popularity of Buddhism in Western societies? Images of the Buddha are now enshrined around the world. The path to enlightenment that first gained currency in India has gradually spread to Western countries as well as throughout Asia. Wherever Asian Buddhists traveled, they carried Buddhism into their new surroundings. In the middle of the 19th century, Chinese workers migrated to California as the gold rush and railways opened up employment opportunities. In their new surroundings they built temples to Guanyin and Amitabha. In the late 19th century, Japanese workers migrated to Hawaii as plantation workers and to the west coast of the United States. Wherever they settled, they invited priests of various Buddhist schools from Japan. The largest school, Jodo Shinshu, gradually formed an organization called Buddhist Churches of America. By the end of the century, Western Orientalists and occultists had developed considerable interest in Buddhism. The landmark 1893 World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago included a large delegation of Buddhist teachers from Japan and some from China, Thailand, and Sri Lanka. One of the leading figures, Anagarika Dharmapala from Sri Lanka, announced that just as King Ashoka had 24 centuries earlier spread Buddhism from India to teach Asia the noblest lessons of tolerance and gentleness, 50 the Buddhists had come, bringing the same message to the West. Overflow crowds collected to hear their discourses. During the 20th century, North American and European countries became vibrant centers of Buddhism. Scholars today are studying Buddhist traditions at a variety of universities, and many people are interested in learning Buddhist meditation practices. The exodus of Buddhists from Tibet since 1959, including many High Lamas, has led to the establishment of Tibetan Buddhist centers in many Western countries as well as in Southeast Asia and India. The Dalai Lama's home in exile, where more than 100,000 Tibetan refugees now live. Several 100,000 Westerners now have some spiritual involvement with Tibetan Buddhism. More than 400 Zen meditation centers are also flourishing in North America. alone, and there are many Zen monasteries that give training in Zazen and offer a monastic lifestyle as a permanent or temporary alternative to the stress and confusion of modern life. Intensive Vipassana meditation retreats lasting up to 3 months are held in Theravada centers such as the Insight Meditation Society in rural Bar, Massachusetts. Theravadin teachers from Southeast Asia and Europe make free Quen visits to conduct retreats, and American teachers who have undertaken rigorous training in Southeast Asia under traditional meditation masters are also emerging as respected teachers. An American monk named Venerable Sumedho, who trained in traditional Theravada Buddhism in Thailand, has established M05_P136186_CH05.INDD173 the 20th of November 2015 1337. 174 Buddhism. Religion in practice. Life in a Western Zen monastery. Side by side in still rows, with birdsong and sunlight streaming in through the tall windows, sit the monks and laypeople of Zen Mountain Monastery. For 30 5-minute blocks, separated by periods of attentive walking, they support each other by practicing Zazen together in silence. With this group structure, many find it easier to carry on the rigorous discipline of serious Zen training than they would by themselves. This particular monastery, located in the Catskill Mountains near Mount Tremper, New York, reflects the changing face of religion in the United States. More than 100 years ago, the main building was handcrafted of stone as a Benedictine monastery. Later it became a Lutheran summer camp. Now, back to back with Christ on the cross on the outside of the building is a statue of the Buddha on the altar inside the zendo. The monastery houses ordained monastics, including women who have taken lifetime vows of service, novices and postulants in training, an aspect adopted from Western monasticism, lay residents who stay for up to a year, and groups of people who come for special retreats and classes. These are primarily professionals and family people from the mainstream culture, rather than the hippies who embraced Buddhism in the 1960s and 1970s. They do not come for a comfortable vacation, for Zazen is hard work and the teachers are dedicated to creating snags that help people discover the places where they are not free. They are expected to practice intensely and then leave, carrying what they have learned back into the world. As Jeffrey Shu Gen Arnold, sensei, who received Dharma transmission in 1997, says, if Zen doesn't work in the world, it's not working. In addition to long sessions of silent sitting and walking, Dharma talks by the resident Zen master, and private coaching by the monks, monastery residents participate in structured non-theistic liturgical services designed to foster attentiveness and appreciation. They chant in Japanese and English, with 174 Buddhism. John Daido Lori Roshi, 1931 to 2009. Founder of Zen Mountain Monastery. An American ordained in both authentic Zen lineages M05_P136186_CH05.INDD170 for the 20th of November, 2015, 1337. Buddhism 175. Frequent bowing to each other, to their meditation cushions, and to the Buddha on the altar, in solidarity with all beings and gratitude for the teachings. The late Abbot John Dado Laurie, who was born a Catholic, noted that liturgy reflects the innards of a religion. In Catholicism, cathedrals are awe-inspiring, the chants expansive. In Zen, the form is simple and the chanting is grounded, not otherworldly. The rest of the day is devoted to taking care of the buildings and 200-acre, 80-hectare nature sanctuary. Mindfulness practice done in silence, body practice, Zen art practices, academic study, and work practice. Those with office jobs combine ancient and modern skills. They sit cross-legged on low cushions before their computers to prepare news, music, and interviews for their online radio station WZEN.org, and use calligraphic skills to hand letter signs. Meals are simple and include coarse breads donated by a nearby whole grain bakery. Every action, even brushing one's teeth, is treated as practice, in the sense of bringing total attentiveness to the sacredness of even the most mundane activity, teaching that enlightenment takes place in one's everyday experience. Following the lead of their former teacher Dado, who was at once highly disciplined in mind-to-mind Dharma transmission and down-to-earth, approachable, compassionate, and married, monastery residents are human, playful, and loving. The women monks shave their heads when they get ordained and keep their hair very short thereafter, but that is considered a freedom rather than self-sacrificing asceticism. From training in flower arranging or Aikido to exploring the relevance of Buddhist principles in the workplace, Zen mountain monasteries programs are oriented toward one central goal: the personal experience of enlightenment and its application in the 21st century world. The stillness of the Zendo at Zen Mountain Monastery. Oryoki, a ceremonial meal at Zen Mountain Monastery. Buddhism 175. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD175 the 20th of November, 2015, 1337. 176. Buddhism. Monastic forest communities and meditation centers in England, Switzerland, Italy, and the United States. In contrast to the low profile of Buddhist women in Asia, many Buddhist centers in the West are led by women who are explaining traditional Buddhist teachings to Westerners in fresh, contemporary ways. Some are exemplars of dedicated spiritual practice, such as Tenzin Palmo, a British woman who became a Tibetan Buddhist nun and lived alone for 12 years. In a cave located 13,200 feet, 4,000 meters, high in the Himalayas, undergoing tremendous austerities in the quest for enlightenment. The Vietnamese monk Venerable Master Thich Nhat Hanh now lives in exile in southern France, conducting retreats for both women and men in a commune called Plum Village. When he travels internationally, large audiences gather and derive inspiration from his teachings. He speaks simply, using familiar examples, and emphasizes bringing the awareness fostered by meditation into everyday life rather than making spirituality a separate compartment of one's life. He says, "When we walk in the meditation hall, we make careful steps, very slowly. But when we go to the airport, we are quite another person. We walk very differently, less mindfully. How can we practice at the airport and in the market?" 51. Buddhism is often embraced by people in the West because they long for peace of mind in the midst of a chaotic materialistic life. The Buddhist concept of mindfulness has become especially popular, and there are many mindfulness teachings and practices that take inspiration from Buddhist tradition but present mindfulness in a secular context, from mindfulness workshops for corporate and business leaders to formal programs such as mindfulness-based stress reduction. Many psychotherapists are studying Buddhism for its insights into the mind and human suffering. Richard Clark, who was both a psychotherapist and a Zen teacher and founded the Living Dharma Center in Massachusetts, proposed that a discipline such as Zen should be part of the training of counselors and therapists. Emptiness is the source of infinite compassion in working with people, to really feel a person without any agenda, to be spacious to that person, to will that they be the way they are. When a person experiences that in someone's presence, then Buddhism has spread around the world. Venerable Tenzin Palmo from England, who spent 12 years in a cave in the Himalayas, is standing sixth from the left with Buddhist nuns from Switzerland, India, Nepal, Mongolia, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Australia, Vietnam, the Netherlands, and the United States during a gathering of Daughters of the Buddha in Mongolia. M05136186186_CH05.INDD176 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 177. They can drop away those things that they've invented to present themselves with. Those faces, those armors, those forms of the self become unnecessary. 52. Are Westerners able to achieve enlightenment by taking Buddhist work shops here and there? Particularly in the case of Tibetan Buddhist practices, Westerners often want to be initiated into the most highly advanced teachings, without taking time for years of patient practice and being inwardly transformed by the step-by-step foundational teachings. Can teachings developed within a specific cultural context be directly transplanted into the soil of an entirely different culture? Most Westerners who are adopting Buddhist practices are living in highly materialistic societies with different priorities and values, rather than in traditional Buddhist cultures or monastic settings. In their impatience to get results, many shop around from one teacher to the next and experiment with one practice after another, rather than persisting with one path over a long time. As Alan Wallace remarks, in Tibetan society, fickleness is considered to be one of the worst of vices, while reliability, integrity, trustworthiness, and perseverance are held in high regard. So a few of the finest lamas are now refusing even to come to the West. Some are feeling, given the brevity and preciousness of human life, that devoting time to people with such fickleness and so little faith is time not very well spent. 53. Another crucial issue is how to train teachers for the West. Two large Tibetan Buddhist organizations from the Gelugpa order have opened nearly 600 centers for study and meditation around the world, but do not have enough fully trained lamas to staff all of them. Traditional training takes up to 25 years of rigorous study and debate of the finer points of Buddhist philosophy, logic, meditation, cosmology, psychology, and monastic life. Close guidance by an advanced teacher has traditionally been considered essential, but this is not possible for all Western aspirants, given the shortage of qualified teachers and the language problems entailed. Given the differences in culture, background, and motivation, are Western students and their teachers in the process of creating new forms of Buddhism adapted to Western ways? How authentic are these new forms? Some observers feel that Western Buddhism, with its emphasis on inner practice rather than outer forms, is actually closer to what they construe as the core of early Buddhism than are later developments in the East. Contemporary Western Buddhists tend to be oriented to the goal of achieving enlightenment by their own efforts, which is reportedly what the Buddha prescribed for his followers, and are searching for ways to achieve that goal, though sometimes hoping to do so with minimum effort. Whether or not Western Buddhism conforms to early patterns, it seems to be evolving in new directions, with some people in the West remaking Buddhism in their own image. For instance, the British Buddhist Stephen Batchelor argues in his book Buddhism Without Beliefs that the West needs a Buddhism stripped of belief in rebirth and karma. He emphasizes instead a secularized version, an existential, therapeutic and liberating agnosticism. 54. Another important difference between Western Buddhism and historical developments in Asia is the Western tendency to support equal participation of women as renunciates, teachers, and lay practitioners. In recent years, Buddhists in Asia, confronted by modernization, consumerism, globalization, and new social attitudes, are taking direction similar to those of Western Buddhists. Since 1987, Buddhist women from Asia and the West have joined hands and held international gatherings to enhance the role of women in Buddhism. Sakyadhita, Daughters of the Buddha, the International Association of Buddhist Women, is working to improve conditions for women's Buddhist education, practice, ordination, and training as teachers of Buddhism. Sakyadhita's conferences bring together women and men, lay and ordained, from different traditions to exchange ideas on meditation, peace-building, and women's roles in contemporary Buddhist practice. The 2008 Sakyadhita Conference in Mongolia. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD177, the 20th of November, 2015, 1337. 178 Buddhism highlighted Buddhist women's achievements in recent years as well as persistent inequalities in education and ordination. The 2011 Sakyadhita Conference in Bangkok paid tribute to eminent Buddhist women in the past and in contemporary society, with panels on issues such as leadership and lineage, stereotypes of women, global sustainability, and new directions for Buddhist social transformation. In 2013, the Bhutan Nuns Foundation held an international nuns conference with nuns from different traditions discussing the Buddhist nuns' role in contemporary society. Karma lectured Somo, founder of Sakyadhita, and also the Jamyang Foundation, which tries to increase educational opportunities for Buddhist nuns, says there are 300 million Buddhist women in the world. They have tremendous potential, goodwill, and energy to work for peace and the benefit of humanity. 55. Socially engaged Buddhism. How is Buddhism responding to social problems in the world today? An emerging focus in contemporary Buddhist practice is the relevance of Buddhism to social problems. Contrary to popular assumptions, the Buddha did not advise people to permanently leave society to seek their own enlightenment. Sri Lankan Buddhist monk Walpola Rahula, 1907–1997, explained, "It may perhaps be useful in some cases for a person to live in retirement for a time in order to improve his or her mind and character, as preliminary moral, spiritual, and intellectual training, to be strong enough to come out later and help others. But if someone lives an entire life in solitude, thinking only of their own happiness and salvation, without caring for their fellow beings, this surely is not in keeping with the Buddha's teaching, which is based on love, compassion, and service to others." 56. Buddhism, like other world religions, has always been engaged with the wider society and political life. In Thailand, for instance, the king is the bearer of the Buddhist heritage and thus has sacred legitimization. But Thailand also has a tradition of socially conscious lay practice of Buddhism. The renowned Thai monk Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, 1906–1993, was a great critic of capitalism, teaching that it increases egoism and selfishness, thus causing distress both to the individual and to society. In Vietnam, Thich Nhat Hanh and other socially active Buddhists refused to take sides with the governments and military movements of either North Vietnam or South Vietnam during the Vietnam War, for they felt that both were oppressing the common people and also exploiting American soldiers. All were victims of an ideological conflict between communism and anti-communism. Buddhists worked hard to bring a negotiated end to the war and helped the suffering people as best they could by evacuating villagers caught in the midst of battles, helping to rebuild damaged buildings, taking care of orphans, and providing medical care to people from all sides. They believed that all life is precious and interdependent, violence and suffering affect everyone. Thus, they meditated to generate selfless compassion, according to the teachings of the Buddha, who said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred. It is appeased by love. This is an eternal law." Just as a mother would protect her only child, even at the risk of her own life, even so let one cultivate a boundless heart towards all beings. Let one's thoughts of boundless love pervade the whole world. 57. However, Buddhism's link with politics has not always been entirely altruistic. In Sri Lanka, a selective interpretation of Theravada Buddhist tradition was used to bolster nationalistic sentiments among the Sinhalese Buddhist majority. against the Tamil, mostly Hindu and Muslim, as well as Christian, minority in M05_P136186_CH05.INDD178, the 20th of November, 2015, 1337. Buddhism 179. A conflict that had been going on for 2,000 years. As in many contemporary fundamentalist movements elsewhere, a chauvinistic, rigid version of religious identity developed in response to rapid colonization, modernization, and westernization. The reaffirmation of Buddhist identity became a tool of ethnic oppression of the minority, leading to a violent separatist movement among the Tamils and ultimately civil strife which disrupted life on the island from 1983 to 2009. Since 2012, there have been clashes between Buddhists and the Muslim minority Rohingya people in Myanmar, Burma, with the monk Wirathu speaking out against Muslims and supporting campaigns designed to force Muslims to leave Myanmar. In general, however, the Buddha's emphasis on compassion has prevailed. And even when Buddhists have been social activists, they have tended to be guided by Buddhist principles of nonviolence, compassion, and social justice. In this posture, some contemporary Buddhists have tried to correct injustice, oppression, famine, cruelty to animals, nuclear testing, warfare, and environmental devastation. Thai Buddhist activist and founder of the International Network of Engaged Buddhists, Sulak Sivaraksa, born in 1933, has challenged traditional models of economic development, explaining that the goals of Buddhist development are equality, love, freedom, and liberation. The means for achieving these lie within the grasp of any community, from a village to a nation, once its members begin the process of reducing selfishness. To do so, two realizations are necessary: an inner realization concerning greed, hatred, and delusion, and an outer realization concerning the impact these tendencies have on society and the planet. 58. Ajahn Pongsak, a Thai Buddhist monk, was so troubled by the devastation of the northern Thai forests that he rallied 5,000 villagers to reforest an area by building a tree nursery, terracing the eroded hillsides, planting nearly 200,000 seedlings, laying irrigation pipes, and fencing the area to protect the new trees. He taught them the importance of a respectful relationship with the forest as their own home, their own parent. He says, "A mind that feels no gratitude to the forest is a coarse mind indeed. Without this basic Sila Dhamma, moral teaching, how can a mind attain enlightenment? The times are dark and Sila Dhamma is asleep, so it is now the duty of monks to reawaken and bring back Sila Dhamma. Only in this way can society be saved." 59. Cambodians are in the process of recovering from decades of a culture of terror in which the Khmer Rouge murdered more than 1 million people. Buddhists have played major roles in peacemaking and rebuilding the country, promoting non-violent responses to violence. The monks of Buddhism for development, for instance, have gone to the villages and cities to carry out community development projects, emphasizing the Dharma of physical development, moral development, spiritual development, and intellectual development. The most instrumental figure has been Venerable Maha Ghosananda. 1929 to 2007, whose entire family was killed during the Pol Pot regime. In addition to political initiatives, he led many peace marches of monks, nuns, and laypeople through areas infested with landmines and counseled people facing issues such as domestic violence, HIV, AIDS, deforestation, and dire poverty. He urged, "We must remove the landmines in our hearts which prevent us from making peace, greed, hatred, and delusion. We can overcome greed with the weapon of generosity, we can overcome hatred with the weapon of loving kindness, we can overcome delusion with the weapon of wisdom." 60. Mahagosananda courageously led peace marches through Khmer Rouge territory and, as leader of the decimated population of Buddhist monks in post-communist Cambodia, helped to revive the religion and the country. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD179, the 20th of November, 2015, 1337. 180 Buddhism. We must find the courage to leave our temples and enter the temples of human experience, temples that are filled with suffering. If we listen to the Buddha, Christ, or Gandhi, we can do nothing else. The refugee camps, the prisons, the ghettos and the battlefields will then become our temples. 61. Another notable example of the use of Buddhist teachings as an antidote to violence is Aung San Suu Kyi, leader of the National League for Democracy in Myanmar. Her father was assassinated in the attempt to bring democracy to the people, and she has been an outspoken advocate of democratic social change, repeatedly exposing herself to danger and ill health from continual house arrest or imprisonment. When she was freed from house arrest in 2010, she spoke of the most dangerous kind of politics, the politics of dissent. You do not ask NLD workers if they have ever been to prison. You ask them how many times they have been to jail. Their weapons are their faith, their armor is their passion, our passion. What is the cause to which we are so passionately dedicated as to forego the comforts of a conventional existence? We are dedicated to the defense of the right of individuals to free and truthful life. For a dissident, freedom from fear does not have to be complete. It only has to be sufficient to enable us to carry on. And to carry on in spite of fear requires tremendous courage. 62. Living by Buddhist principles to counteract fear and cope with government oppression, Aung San Suu Kyi observes, "It would be difficult to dispel ignorance unless there is freedom to pursue the truth, unfettered by fear." With so close a relationship between fear and corruption, it is little wonder that in any society where fear is rife, corruption in all forms becomes deeply entrenched. The effort necessary to remain uncorrupted in an environment where fear is an integral part of everyday existence is not immediately apparent to those fortunate enough to live in states governed by the rule of law. Where there are no such laws, the burden of holding the principles of justice and common decency falls on the ordinary people. 63. In Taiwan, Buddhist values mixed with Confucian civil ethics and Taoism have helped to support freedom and democracy. The engaged Buddhist thrust is evident in Taiwan in several new Mahayana organizations that are attempting to create a pure land in this world rather than waiting for the afterlife. Among these is Tzu Kai, founded by Venerable Cheng Yen in 1966 with donations from 30 housewives. A self-educated nun, Venerable Cheng Yen now heads an efficient bureaucracy with 5 million members in 45 countries who are following and teaching the Bodhisattva path by providing volunteer services such as disaster relief, medicine, education, environmental protection, and bone marrow donor registry. As they work, they sing hymns about the joy of serving. They are taught to regard all of humanity as their own family, true to the Bodhisattva vow. Buddhism had largely declined in India, but then returned during the 20th century as a vehicle for overcoming caste distinctions which had made life so difficult for those considered untouchables, now called Dalits. A Buddhist monk named Lokanatha, for example, wrote a pamphlet entitled Buddhism Will Make You Free and addressed it to the depressed classes of India. Among those who were influenced by this message was Dr. B. R. Ambedkar, 1891 to 1956. Born an untouchable Hindu, he was the chief architect of India's new democratic constitution and built into it many provisions designed to end the oppression of the traditional Hindu caste system. In his personal search for a religion offering freedom and dignity to all human beings, he chose Buddhism. Dr. Ambedkar wrote that he was presented with a book on the Buddha when he was the first person from the lowest caste to graduate from high school. That opened my eyes to Buddhism, and I have read voraciously on the topic ever since. Whatever I have achieved, I owe to the Buddha. I find thorough equality and superb humanism in Buddhism. 64. Aung San Suu Kyi, born in 1945, is internationally famous for her non-violent resistance to oppression in her home country, Myanmar, Burma. M05136186186_CH05.INDD180 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 181. When Dr. Ambedkar publicly converted shortly before his death, he was the inspiration for almost 500,000 Dalits to do likewise. Despite this, he openly questioned and changed certain Buddhist teachings. In Ambedkarite Buddhism, the emphasis is on active social engagement, helping the people, rather than renunciation and meditation. Dr. Ambedkar prescribed 22 vows for his followers, including denouncing belief in Hindu deities and social inequality, and replacing these with affirmations such as, I shall believe in the equality of man, I shall endeavor to follow the Noble Eightfold Path and practice compassion and loving-kindness in everyday life, and I solemnly declare and affirm that I shall hereafter lead my life according to the principles and teachings of the Buddha and his Dhamma. Various Ambedkarite organizations are trying to propagate these vows on a large scale in India, particularly to help erase the traumas of casteism. Ambedkar Buddhists generally reject the Buddhist idea that a person's birth into a particular social class is a result of karma from previous lives. This version of Buddhism based in social activism has been informally called Navayana, new vehicle, comprising what some consider a fourth branch of Buddhism. Buddhism has also been adopted for political purposes in India. Politicians in some areas have tried to promote Dalit liberation through Buddhism and respect for Dr. Ambedkar, whose statue now appears in many towns. Since the Dalits comprise a large vote bank, it is uncertain whether the intention is sincerely to instill Buddhist ideals in them or rather to gain their votes. In the most populous state in India, Uttar Pradesh, the merger of Buddhist religion and politics is particularly controversial. The chief minister up to 2012, a Dalit politician named Mayawati, spent millions of rupees on public monuments honoring the Buddha, Dr. Ambedkar, and local politicians, including herself, affirming that these public works would engender public pride and economic development. Among her projects were the renovation of the ancient Buddhist pilgrimage sites, including Kapilvastu, Sarnath, and Kashinagar, the places of the Buddha's birth, first sermon and death, and Gautam Buddha University, with its schools of humanities and social sciences, management, information technology, law and social justice, biotechnology, engineering and design, and Buddhist studies and civilization. While critics point to the persistence of poverty in Uttar Pradesh, Mayawati's supporters likened her building projects to those of the ancient King Ashoka, who coined the expression Dharma Vijaya, the victory of righteousness. Summarizing the work of engaged Buddhists, Thich Nhat Hanh said, "Once there is seeing, there must be acting. We must be aware of the real problems of the world. Then, with mindfulness, we will know what to do and what not to do to be of help." 65. Sulak Sivaraksa explains that socially engaged Buddhism does not mean promoting Buddhism per se. The presence of Buddhism in society does not mean having a lot of schools, hospitals, cultural institutions, or political parties run by Buddhists. It means that the schools, hospitals, cultural institutions, and political parties are permeated with and administered with humanism, love, tolerance, and enlightenment, characteristics which Buddhism attributes to an opening up, development, and formation of human nature. This is the true spirit of non-violence. 66. Even when one intends to be non-violent in one's approach to life, difficult ethical questions may still arise. For example, contemporary scholars of Buddhist medical ethics are trying to determine how best to apply Buddhist principles to a celebration around a statue of Dr. Ambedkar in honor of his birthday is mixed with political party banners. Dr. Ambedkar inspired many Dalits to convert to Buddhism in order to overcome the oppression caused by the traditional Hindu caste system. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD181 the 20th of November 2015 1337. 182 Buddhism. Issues such as abortion, reproductive technologies, genetic engineering, organ transplants, suicide, coma patients, and euthanasia. Buddhism is thus as relevant today, and its insights as necessary, as in the 5th century BCE, when the one who became Shakyamuni Buddha renounced a life of ease to save all sentient beings from suffering. Key terms: Anatman, Pali, anatta, the principle that there is no eternal self. Anitya, Pali, anicca, impermanence. Arhat, Pali, arhat or arahat, a worthy one who has followed the Buddha's path to liberation. Bhikshu, Pali, bhikkhu, effeminine, bhikshuni or bhikkhuni, a monk or nun who renounces worldliness for the sake of following the path of liberation and whose simple physical needs are met by lay supporters. Bodhisattva, a person who is dedicated to liberating others from suffering. Deity yoga, vajrayana, meditation on a deity in order to develop his or her qualities. Dharma, Pali, Dhamma, the teachings and laws for conduct given by the Buddha. Dukkha, discomfort, suffering, frustration, disharmony. Karma, Pali, karma, actions, the law of cause and effect. Kensho, a sudden experience of enlightened awareness. Koan, a question used by Zen teachers to boggle the student's mind and thus liberate. Direct awareness. Lama, a high vajrayana teacher. Mahayana, the great vehicle, the branch of Buddhist schools that stress the altruistic wish to become perfectly awakened in order to free all living beings from suffering. Nirvana, liberation from mental afflictions, suffering, and rebirth. Pali Canon, ancient Buddhist scriptures written in Pali and considered authoritative. Samsara, cyclic existence, the continual round of birth, death, and rebirth. Sangha, the monastic community, more broadly, a Dharma community. Stupa, monument containing Buddhist relics or images. Shunya, to the doctrine of voidness, emptiness. Theravada, the remaining of the early schools of Buddhism, which adheres to the earliest scriptures. Triple Gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Vajrayana, a branch of Buddhism practiced in the Tibetan diaspora that incorporates deity yoga, mantras, mudras, hand gestures, and mandalas to achieve awakening. Sometimes included as a school of the Mahayana branch. Vipassana, insight. A meditation technique for developing insight into dukkha, anicca, and anatta. Zazen, sitting meditation, in Zen schools. Zen, a Chinese and Japanese Mahayana school emphasizing that all things have Buddha nature, which can only be grasped when one escapes from the intellectual mind. Suggested reading: Carter, John Ross and Mahinda Palahawadana, trans, The Dhammapada, The Sayings of the Buddha, Oxford, Oxford University Press, 2000. A basic book of sayings attributed to the Buddha that covers the essentials of the Dharma in memorable, pithy verses. Cons, Edward, I. B. Horner, David Snellgrove, and Arthur Whaley, ed. and trans. Buddhist Texts Through the Ages, Oxford, One World Publications, 1995. A fine collection of Buddhist scriptures translated from Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, Tibetan, and Japanese. Epsteiner, Fred, ed., The Path of Compassion, Writings on Socially Engaged Buddhism. Berkeley, California, Parallax Press, 1988. A highly readable and relevant collection of essays by leading contemporary Buddhist teachers about the ways in which Buddhism can be applied to social problems. Fields, Rick, How the Swans Came to the Lake, A Narrative History of Buddhism in America. Boston, Sham Parlor, 1986. The multifaceted story of Buddhism's transfer to the United States. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD182 the 20th of November 2015 1337. Buddhism 183. Fremantle, Francesca, and Chogyam Trungpa, trans, The Tibetan Book of the Dead. Boston and London, Sham Parlor Publications, 1975. The Classic Tibetan Buddhist. Scripture on the projections of the mind and the practices of deity yoga to attain enlightenment. Friedman, Lenore, Meetings with Remarkable Women, Buddhist Teachers in America, Boston and London, Sham Parlor Publications, 1987. Wisdom from Buddhist Traditions. Shared in very personal, perceptive interviews. Ghosananda, Moha, Step by Step, Berkeley, California, Parallax Press, 1992. Accessible and touching explanations of basic Buddhist doctrines. Gross, Rita M., Buddhism After Patriarchy, Albany, New York, State University of New York Press, 1993. A feminist reconstruction of Buddhist history, revealing its core of gender equality but later overlays of sexism, plus analysis of key Buddhist concepts from a feminist point of view. Habito, Reuben, Experiencing Buddhism, Ways of Wisdom and Compassion, Maryknoll, New York, Orbis Books, 2005. Clear and sensitive exploration of various ways in which Buddhists are attempting to practice the Buddha's teachings, especially in the contemporary world. Hon. Thich Nhat, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, Transforming Suffering into Peace, Joy, and Liberation, New York, Broadway Books, 1998. In simple, compassionate language, the famous Vietnamese monk explains the efficacy of Buddhist teachings for dealing with today's problems. Heine, Stephen and Charles S. Prebish, Buddhism in the Modern World, Adaptations of an Ancient Tradition, New York, Oxford University Press, 2003. Essays examining how specific schools of Buddhism have adapted to contemporary challenges and yet maintained their links with tradition. Jerry Sun, Michael K., and Mark Jorgensmeyer, eds, Buddhist Warfare, New York. Oxford University Press, 2010. A collection of essays challenging popular conceptions of Buddhism as wholly peaceful, exploring instances in which Buddhists have been involved in warfare. Koza, Stephanie and Kenneth Kraft, Dharma Reign, Sources of Buddhist Environmentalism. Boston and London, Sham Parlor, 2000. Classic and Contemporary Texts Integrating Buddhist Spirituality with Environmental Awareness and Activism. Levine, Stephen, A Gradual Awakening, Garden City, New York, Doubleday, 1979. And London, Ryder and Company, 1980. Gentle, Poetic Presentation of Vipassana Techniques in Their Relevance to Contemporary Life. Lopez, Donald S., Jr., ed., Buddhism in Practice, Princeton, Princeton University Press. 1995, annotated translation of original sources dealing with Buddhist practice. Around the World, organized around the Triple Jewels of Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Lopez, Donald S., Jr., ed., A Modern Buddhist Bible, Essential Readings from East and West. Boston, Beacon Press, 2002. An anthology of original writings by modern Buddhist teachers trying to revive original Buddhist traditions of meditation and spirituality. Lopez, Donald S., Jr., The Story of Buddhism, A Concise Guide to Its History and Teachings. San Francisco, Harper San Francisco, 2001. An introduction incorporating the latest scholarship. Mackenzie, Vicky, Cave in the Snow, London, Bloomsbury Publishing, 1999. Fascinating story of a Western woman who spent 12 years alone in a Himalayan cave to concentrate on intense meditation practices and achieve enlightenment in a woman's body. Mitchell, Donald W., Buddhism, Introducing the Buddhist Experience, New York and Oxford, Oxford University Press, 2002. Detailed descriptions of general and culture specific manifestations of Buddhism. Niwano, Nikyo, trans. Richard L. Gage, Lifetime Beginner, Tokyo, Kosi Publishing Company. 1978. Fascinating stories from the life of the founder of Risho Kosakai as he tried to put the Lotus Sutra into practice in the midst of great difficulties. Powers, John, A Bull of a Man, Images of Masculinity, Sex, and the Body in Indian Buddhism. Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard University Press, 2009. Study of how portrayals of the Buddha in Indian Buddhism emphasized virility. Queen, Christopher, Charles Prebish, and Damien Keown, eds., Action Dharma, New Studies in Engaged Buddhism, London, Routledge, 2003. Articles on both the theory and practice of Buddhist involvement in contemporary social and political causes. Queen, Christopher S., and Sally B. King, eds., Engaged Buddhism, Buddhist Liberation. Movements in Asia, Albany, State University of New York Press, 1996. A thorough M05136186186_CH05.INDD183 the 20th of November 2015 1337 184 Buddhism Survey of Contemporary Buddhist Activism in Asian Countries. Rahula, Walpalashri, What the Buddha Taught, New York, Grove Press, 1974. The Classic Introduction to Buddhist Teachings, an accurate and clear guide through the complexities of Buddhist thought and practice, with representative texts. Reynolds, Frank E., and Jason A. Carbine, eds., The Life of Buddhism, Berkeley University of California Press, 2000. Attempts to analyze Buddhist ways in their cultural and historical contexts. Sivaraksa, Sulak, Seeds of Peace, A Buddhist Vision for Renewing Society, Berkeley, California, Parallax Press, 1992. A renowned Thai social activist examines the politics of greed and issues involved in the transformation of society from the point of view of Buddhist ideals. Suzuki, Shun Ryu, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, New York and Tokyo, Weatherhill, 1970. A beautiful book, leading one gracefully and seemingly simply through the paradoxes of Zen. Tsomo, Karma Lecture, ed., Out of the Shadows, Socially Engaged Buddhist Women, Delhi. Sri Satguru Publications, 2006. Realistic in-depth expressions of Buddhist women's experiences in many cultures and their efforts to uphold the Dharma therein. 5.1 Tell the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, was reportedly born near what is today the border between India and Nepal and lived for more than 80 years, most likely during the 5th century BCE. On being shown 4 sites that his wealthy father tried to hide from him, Siddhartha renounced his wealth, left his wife and newborn son, shaved his head and wore the robe of a wandering ascetic. He embarked on a wandering life in pursuit of finding the way to total liberation from suffering. Siddhartha studied first with several Brahmin teachers and then went 6 years of extreme self-denial techniques, but this extreme ascetic path did not lead to enlightenment. He then changed to a middle way that rejected both self-indulgence and self-denial, and finally experienced a supreme awakening. He had a realization of the wheel of repeated death and rebirth, in which past good or bad deeds are reflected in future lives. He realized the cause of pain and the means for ending it. He subsequently spent decades walking and teaching ever-increasing groups of followers all over northern India. 5.2 Define the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path to Liberation. The Buddha's core teachings became known as the Dharma and included the 4 Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the 3 Marks of Existence, and other guidelines for achieving liberation from suffering. The 4 Noble Truths form the foundation for all the Buddha's later teachings. The first Noble Truth is the truth of pain and suffering, dukkha. The second is the arising of pain, the third is the cessation of pain, and the fourth is the path to end pain. The Noble Eightfold Path offers ways to purify the mind of afflictive emotions and avoid unwholesome actions. Ultimately, the path leads to freedom from the cycle of death and rebirth, and the peace of nirvana, egoless state of bliss. The aspects of the path are right understanding, right thought or motivation, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right meditation. 5.3 Differentiate between Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. Followers of Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism share many ideas and practices in common and are in general agreement about the 4 Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the teachings about karma, actions, samsara, cyclic existence, and nirvana. M05136186186_CH05.INDD180 for 20 November 2015, 1337. Buddhism 185. Theravada, Way of the Elders, is the only earliest school to survive and is prevalent in Southeast Asian countries such as Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. Theravada Buddhists study the early scriptures in Pali, honor the life of renunciation, and follow mindfulness and insight meditation teachings. The schools that developed somewhat later are collectively known as Mahayana, Great Vehicle, and gradually became dominant in China, Nepal, Tibet, China, Korea, Mongolia, Vietnam, and Japan. The Mahayana scriptures emphasize the practice of compassion and wisdom by both monastics and lay people toward the goal of liberating all sentient beings from dukkha. 5.4 Identify the schools of Mahayana in East Asia. Chan Buddhism, with its emphasis on meditation and direct insight, became the most successful form of Buddhism in China from the 5th century CE. The Chan school was transmitted in the 13th century CE to Japan, where it is known as Zen. Instead of focusing on scriptures, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, those dead, dedicated to liberating others from suffering, Zen emphasizes direct insight into the true nature of one's own mind, to reveal one's own Buddha nature. One of the most popular Buddhist schools in East Asia is Pure Land Buddhism, which centers on faith in Amitabha Buddha, Amida in Japanese, who promised to welcome believers to the paradise of the Pure Land, a metaphor for enlightenment. In Japan there is also the Nichiren school, inspired by the Lotus Sutra, which stresses the importance of striving to enlighten not only ourselves but also society. 5.5 Contrast Vajrayana with Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. Although some scholars classify it as a form of Mahayana Buddhism, many consider Vajrayana a separate branch. Followers of Vajrayana call it the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. Vajrayana, developed in India, was transmitted to Tibet in the 8th century CE and is currently practiced throughout the Tibetan diaspora and increasingly in North America and Europe. In contrast to Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, which emphasize cyclic existence, Vajrayana is an esoteric path that offers the possibility of attaining Buddhahood in a single lifetime. It incorporates deity yoga, mantras, mudras, hand gestures, and mandalas, a symmetrical image used for meditation, to achieve awakening. 5.6 Describe the major Buddhist festivals. For Theravadins, the most important festival is Vesak, which marks on one day the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and death. For Mahayana Buddhists, Vesak marks the day of the Buddha's enlightenment. Vajrayana Buddhists celebrate for distinct days commemorating the Buddha's conception, birth, enlightenment, and death. Some Buddhists also celebrate Magha Puja Day, which commemorates a major event early in the Buddha's teachings. 5.7 Discuss the growing popularity of Buddhism in Western societies. During the 20th century, North American and European countries became vibrant centers of Buddhism. The exodus of Buddhists from Tibet since 1959 has led to the establishment of Tibetan Buddhist centers in many Western countries. More than 400 Zen monasteries are flourishing in North America. Monks and teachers, such as Venerable Master Thich Nhat Hanh, conduct retreats for both men and women in meditation centers in North America and Europe. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD185 the 20th of November 2015 1337 186 Buddhism. Buddhism is often embraced by people in the West because they long for peace of mind in the midst of a chaotic materialistic life. The Buddhist concept of mindfulness has become especially popular, and there are many mindfulness teachings and practices that take inspiration from Buddhist tradition but present mindfulness in a secular context. Western Buddhists emphasize inner practice rather than outer forms and tend to be oriented to the goal of achieving enlightenment by their own efforts. There is also a tendency to support equal participation of women as renunciates, teachers, and lay practitioners. 5.8 Outline the emerging focus on social problems in contemporary Buddhist practice. In general, Buddhist social activists have tended to be guided by Buddhist principles of non-violence, compassion, and social justice. In Cambodia, Buddhists have played major roles in peacemaking and rebuilding the country. Another notable example of the use of Buddhist teachings as an antidote to violence is Aung San Suu Kyi, leader of the National League for Democracy in Myanmar, Burma, an outspoken advocate of democratic social change. In Taiwan, Buddhist values mixed with Confucian civil ethics and Taoism have helped to support freedom and democracy. In India, Buddhism returned during the 20th century as a vehicle for overcoming the caste distinctions that had made life so difficult for those considered untouchables, Dalits. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, an untouchable Hindu who publicly converted to Buddhism shortly before his death, was the chief architect of India's new democratic constitution. In Ambedkarite Buddhism, the emphasis is on active social engagement, helping the people, rather than on renunciation and meditation. M05_P136186_CH05.INDD186 20th of November 2015 1337